Chapter 395. At this moment, everyone finally understood the young man's true intentions. If he hadn't intervened in time, the camp would have lost another 2 demonists. Several members of the Three-Eyed clan hurriedly used their vision skills to search for other Bloodstorm bugs on the ship. Fortunately, they didn't find any. After all, it wasn't easy to cultivate such high-level bugs. Reynolds looked at the young man's series of actions in surprise. He then looked at the bloody bug in front of him that was frozen in ice and said to the young man, "Thank you for saving my life." The young man smiled and didn't say anything. The faces of the demonists turned pale with fright. If the young man hadn't intervened, they would have died under the attack of the little bug. Their deaths would have been as ugly as their 2 companions. They all said to the young man, with a dignified expression, "Thank you for saving my life." The young man didn't say anything. He just clapped his hands together. The 2 bugs trapped in the ice cage and the bug in front of Reynolds let out miserable screams that were disproportionate to their bodies. Then they turned into ice shards and fell to the ground. Looking at the approaching Chimera's magic octopus and the solemn-looking young man, Reynolds repeatedly pondered a question in his heart. What exactly made this group of powerful and ferocious pirates want to hijack such an ordinary passenger ship? It didn't make sense that a whale's appetite was only for a small shrimp. A passenger ship definitely wouldn't be able to attract the attention of a large pirate group like the Black Skull. Otherwise, they wouldn't be one of the most famous pirate groups. Reynolds didn't deny that these people were related to him. Perhaps they were here for him. However, it could also be that there was some precious treasure on the ship. This treasure must be shockingly valuable to attract the attention of the Black Skull pirates and cause them to send a large number of people to rob it. However, it shouldn't be possible. Who would consign such a thing to a passenger ship with such low defensive capabilities? It couldn't be that the Black Skull pirates had returned to the Sky Phoenix Sea, so they wanted to get one first, regardless of whether the target was fat or thin, right? This reason was too boring. Reynolds quickly eliminated it. "Goa! Goa!" The cry from the sky interrupted Reynolds' thoughts. Looking towards the source of the sound, he saw several eagles circling above the sea in a circle with their heads and tails connected. Judging from the situation, they should be pirates. Moguls were low-level flying-type magical beasts, but once they were branded with the words flying type, it determined their unusual value. Both in the sky and in the sea, this large net was airtight. It could be seen that the Black Skull pirates were determined to get this. Reynolds' heart skipped a beat. If it was only for wealth, they would only need to intercept the ship. There was no need to make such a big fuss. Even the flying-type magical beasts were dispatched. Low-level flying-type magical beasts were not strong, and their attacking power was not great. Another possibility was that an important person had disguised himself on the ship for some special reason, and the pirates had to make a move on him for some unknown reason. Furthermore, they had to prevent him from escaping using a flying-type magical beast. After calculating the strength of both sides, Reynolds felt that there was no chance of winning this battle. The number of enemies was about the same as their own, but their quality was several levels higher. Moreover, all of them had been through hundreds of battles and had rich experience. Even if there were a few powerful individuals among the crew, the outcome of a large-scale, unknown battle was not something that could be changed by a single person. Speaking of which, the tomb Maggot Philip of the 3 Ghost Generals. Soulless Ghost Ming Luo, who was proficient in both long-range and short-range combat, was not to be trifled with. Not to mention the leader of their operation this time, Beast Trainer Davindoka. Several colorful lights whizzed straight into the sky, dispersing in all directions. They flew higher and higher, farther and farther. Their colors were so bright. They were also clearly visible during the day. This was a magic signal flare used to call for help. Townsend knew that the chances of winning this battle were close to 0. He had no choice but to send out the signal flare, hoping that someone would discover it and come to help. Of course, in the vast and boundless ocean, the chances of getting help were not much higher than 0. Davindoka snorted coldly and did not order the Moguls to shoot it down. Even if there were other ships nearby, the battle would have already ended by the time they arrived. Moreover, He was used to running amok. Other than the government's army, he was not afraid of anyone else. Seeing that the pirate ship continued to approach, the battle was on the verge of breaking out. Reynolds calculated in his mind. He had the Apocalypse bracelet, so he could hide in the bracelet first. But who knew where he would be when he came out? He could not hide in there forever. At this time, the handsome young man beside Reynolds walked over and suddenly patted Reynolds on the shoulder, saying, "Brother, we have to work hard together." Reynolds looked at him and found that he had an encouraging smile on his face. He felt warm in his heart and said, "I will. My name is Reynolds. How should I address you?" The young man smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Reynolds, just call me Tian Yuan. I thought that this trip to Chong and Academy would be smooth sailing, but I did not expect that the ship would capsize so close to home." When Reynolds heard Tian Yuan's destination, he had a good impression of him and said, "I am also going to Chong and Academy. Brother Tian Yuan, we are really fated." After a pause, Reynolds smiled bitterly and said, "In this situation, it would be best to abandon the ship and escape. But who knows if the bottom of the sea is safer than on the ship?" Tian Yuan shook his head and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." At this time, the Karagal shook violently, and the color of the enchantment faded. It could be seen that it was constantly being weakened. The distance between the two sides was finally within the attack range. The battle began. The sky was full of arrows, fireballs, wind blades, and other flying skills. They collided fiercely in the air, exploded, and sparks flew everywhere. The scene brought about by the resistance of spiritual energy was dazzling. But this beautiful scene did not bring beauty, but death. The enchantment finally could not withstand the power of the attack that exceeded its load. It shattered with a bang like a glass under heavy pressure. Then Azrael's scythe began to wreak havoc, reaping one life after another. People on the Karagal wailed and fell down one after another. Some were shot into hedgehogs, some were burned to ashes, and some had their limbs cut into pieces. Some were directly blasted out of the ship and devoured by the sea demons attracted by the battle. There were also people who were seriously injured but not dead. They wailed in pain on the ground and were assisted by several priests who came to rescue them. But unfortunately, they became one of the victims. Although this level of long-range attack did not pose a big threat to Reynolds, it was still hair-raising. Watching the overwhelming number of skills flying past him, if he was in the middle of the shooting of a submachine gun, that kind of feeling was extremely shocking. It was not that Reynolds had never seen a group battle. On the contrary, he had personally experienced the battle between the guards of the Great Wall and the soldiers of Babika of the Orc Alliance. The water was not idle either. The sea pets of the two sides were entangled. The surface of the sea seemed to be boiling, surging, and rolling. From time to time, water columns rose high and then fell back into the sea. Chapter 396. Whirlpools of various sizes were formed under the impact of the shock waves, sucking in the corpses and blood. Many quick-witted earth and sea demons waited excitedly outside the battlefield. This tragedy had turned into a rare feast for them. Kill them all. Philip on the Chimera magic octopus flew into a rage because he had lost 2 high-grade bloodstorm bugs that he had painstakingly cultivated. He had wanted to show off his might before the real battle began. He had thought that his 2 tiny, transparent bugs would be able to kill 6 people without anyone noticing. Even if they were discovered, they would be able to escape safely because they were pitifully small and nimble. There were very few skills that could catch them. He hadn't expected that they would be discovered and killed. Philip couldn't help but curse out loud in his heartache. He wished he could sacrifice the entire ship's crew to the bugs. However, he didn't dare to take revenge himself. Although there were many bugs that could fly or swim in the water, the shockwaves from both sides' skills had been shattered. The shockwaves from the explosions could kill them at any time. Apart from magicians and archers who focused on long-range attacks, high-intensity and high-density flying skills were too taxing and couldn't be maintained for long. The end result of a group battle was usually a melee battle. However, there was an exception this time. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great so much so that the battle of flying skills hadn't even ended. Tian Yuan seemed to have some strength, but because of the barrier, he was still sweating profusely and could only protect himself. The Caragul side had been defeated as expected, and it was a crushing defeat. It could only be described as a massacre. Only some races with strong defenses, such as knights and barbarians, as well as the archers, clerics, and so on, were still standing. They were barely able to protect themselves and had no strength to attack. The others were either dead or injured. The magician seemed to only have Tian Yuan left. The enemy's casualties were minimal, with only a dozen or so dead and 20 light injuries. However, this result was already very surprising to the pirates. They should have expected the losses to be even lower. The strangest thing was that 2 of the dead pirates were magicians. Although the distance between the 2 sides was relatively close, they were at the back of the team and were well protected. They couldn't figure out whose skills were powerful enough to break through the layers of defense and kill them. The demonic Pathmaster's death was also very strange. There was only a small red dot between his eyebrows that was almost undetectable. Such a small yet powerful skill, other than the Needle Do Chi, there seemed to be nothing else. However, everyone knew that the Needle Do Chi's attack range could not be that far. This was a profound knowledge. The Needle Do Chi's dense and complex structure made it much more difficult to increase its length. It was simply unheard of to be able to hit the vital point between the eyebrows without being affected by the chi force from so far away. Davin Doka removed his hand from the witch's corpse and frowned deeply. These 2 Devil Path Masters had fallen silently on the main ship he was on. He couldn't even protect the important fighting force right under his nose, which made him feel like he had lost face in front of his subordinates. However, he quickly deduced that there must be a terrifying character hiding in the enemy's formation. If this person was the target's helper, then things would be much more difficult. Even if they succeeded, they would have to pay a certain price. Davindoka felt a little apprehensive. He swept his gaze over the people who were still resisting from afar, trying to find some clues, but in the end he found nothing. The death of the 2 Devil Path Masters in the pirate group was Reynolds' secret masterpiece. Reynolds touched the Apocalypse Bracelet, and a trace of madness flashed through his heart. This was the Apocalypse Bracelet's new skill. After piercing the person between the eyebrows, the ice needle would automatically evaporate. It could be said that it killed people without leaving a trace. This skill was taught to Reynolds by Eileen. The unique aura of the underworld condensed into an ice needle. It passed directly from another world to the king's realm and killed people without leaving a trace. Reynolds saw that he had killed people again and naturally felt uncomfortable in his heart. However, at this critical moment, psychological factors could be ignored. Reynolds didn't want to kill people at first, but when the Chimera magic octopus approached, he couldn't help but use the underworld ice needle to kill the 2 Devil Path pirates to vent his anger. The 2 Devil Path Masters weren't that bad at first, but they really couldn't imagine that there was such a magical skill. In the midst of the chaotic battle, they became Reynolds' punching bags. Now, seeing that the situation was settled, Reynolds could only sigh and begin to give up on the liner, looking for an opportunity to slip away. At worst, he could just enter the Apocalypse Bracelet. At least it was better than dying. At this moment, the pirate's fierce and dense wave of attacks suddenly stopped. Then a voice sounded. "Who is the captain? Please come out and speak." The one who spoke was Davindoka. His voice was very gentle, so gentle that no one dared to believe that he was the mastermind behind the massacre just now. Townsend's face was pale. As the captain, he couldn't prevent the misfortune that all the passengers were about to face. He felt that it was a great shame, but he was helpless and couldn't prevent the tragedy from happening. Although he didn't know why Davindoka was looking for him, it was obvious that resistance was futile, so he walked to the bow of the ship in a daze. "I am." Townsend didn't beg for his life and the lives of the crew. Everyone knew how ridiculous it was to beg for mercy from the black skeleton pirates. Davindoka smiled and said, "Put down your weapons and surrender immediately. You only want one of the people on your ship. Hand him over, and the others can leave safely." Reynolds was stunned for a moment. The black skeleton pirates, who had always been known to be inhumane and not leave anyone alive, actually said such a sentence. They were actually so merciful. It was really unbelievable. It felt as strange as a group of hungry wolves that had already killed their way into a sheep pen, saying to the leader, "We only need one sheep, and we'll spare your lives." But he still stopped in his tracks and left with Reynolds. Townsend was also stunned for a moment. Then he said in disbelief, "What did you say?" Philip's eyes widened and he said, "What? How can this be?" He could have enjoyed the pleasure of killing without restraint, but this accident happened. How could he be satisfied? Also, he had just lost 2 high-level bloodstorm bugs. His anger could only be extinguished through blood. Davindoka said coldly, "Philip, don't forget who is the leader of this operation." Philip's violent temper was not easy to control, but this operation required the use of some special ability of his. Otherwise, Davindoka would rather not have him. Philip choked. You. He glared for a long time, but in the end he suppressed the anger in his heart and didn't speak. Chapter 397. Davindoka repeated his words. "Give up resistance and hand over one of you, and the others will have a chance to survive." He spoke slowly and clearly. Townsend was finally convinced that he had not misheard. However, he still could not believe it. If this had been said before the battle, it would have been somewhat believable. But now, they clearly had complete control of the situation. They could have killed the people on the ship and found their target. However, they chose a method that was completely different from the rumors. Could it be that they had been too ruthless in the past, causing public outrage and being encircled by the government's coalition forces? Could it be that the black skeleton pirates had learned their lesson and were no longer as brutal as before? Townsend was shocked. The possibility of this conjecture being true was not small, and in the current situation, he did not doubt Davindoka's authority at all. This was their only chance. It was shameful for the captain to betray a passenger, but if he could save thousands of people with one life, no one would give up on this deal. Moreover, the people behind him had silently agreed. Townsend's face turned green and white. He gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, I hope you can keep your promise." Davindoka smiled proudly. Of course, of course." Townsend spat out a few words with difficulty. Who do you want?" Davindoka's eyes narrowed. "His name is you." Before he could finish speaking, there was a splash. A person in a dark robe suddenly jumped into the water. "Ug, Lady of Moonlight." Davindoka immediately called out her identity. "What?" This time, not only was Reynolds surprised, but Townsend, the captain of the castle, also opened his eyes wide. "Ug, why would someone from the sanctuary come here? What's going on? Who is she?" "The daughter of the president of a sanctuary guild. Lady of Moonlight? Could she be related to Luna?" Reynolds thought honestly and could not help but stop what he was doing. The people on the ship whispered among themselves. There were a few people who jumped into the water with Ug. They were obviously good at swimming and dove down like fish. Davindoka smiled. Water battles were the strength of pirates. Moreover, as a beast trainer, he could mobilize a large number of sea pets and even some low-level sea demons to intercept them. Trying to escape from the water was no different from courting death. Although he didn't understand Ug's suicidal stupidity, Davindoka was full of confidence and couldn't think of a reason why he would fail. He took out a bugle horn from his bosom and placed it near his lips. He was about to command the sea beasts to capture the prey. At this moment, a pitch-black creature with a propeller-like tail, a long and sharp head, and a mouth full of screws, which was 6 to 7 meters long, suddenly rushed out and sucked Victoria and the others into its mouth. Then, it shot into the sea like an arrow. The propeller-like tail provided it with strong momentum, while the long and sharp head reduced the water resistance to a minimum. Everyone was puzzled, from the fact that they were able to hold on until the end of the battle, as well as the fact that the black skeleton pirates had mobilized their troops. They should not be ordinary people, no matter how unexpected that sea demon was. He should have been able to put up some resistance. Moreover, they didn't seem to want to resist at all. Davindoka's expression changed drastically, and he cried out, "Vacuum whirl-tooth shark." As a beast tamer, of course he knew what it was. The vacuum whirl-toothed shark was a special sea creature with internal organs, blood vessels, nerves, and other internal organs distributed over a meter-thick skin. Vacuum referred to its empty abdomen. Spiral referred to the fact that its tail could rotate at high speed like a propeller-like tail, moving extremely fast in the water. Spiral referred to its sharp teeth, which were like screws and could rotate at high speed. They were as sharp as a drill bit and could destroy anything. The vacuum whirl-toothed shark's way of eating was to use its high-speed rotating screw teeth to grind its prey into meat paste and then digest it. It didn't have an ultra-tough barrier like the whale swallow, nor did it have a stomach wall that could regenerate quickly. If a living creature entered its stomach, it would be a big threat. On the other hand, its vacuum abdomen wasn't harmful to humans, and they could even stay inside comfortably, like a living submarine. There was another characteristic. If the vacuum whirl-toothed shark became a human pet, it wouldn't absorb the spiritual energy of its owner like other pets. It would conflict with the demonic aura and would be attacked by demonic beasts. They could live together peacefully. There was no blood on the surface of the sea, which was inconsistent with the hunting method of the vacuum whirl-toothed shark. Judging from the few people's attitude of not resisting just now, the vacuum whirl-toothed shark should be Yuji's pet. The first person to come to this conclusion in an instant was Davindoka, because he understood the characteristics of this rare creature the best. The second person was Ming Luo. Although he had never heard of the vacuum whirl-toothed shark, his calm mind told him that it wasn't his magic pet from the expression on Davindoka's face. Without asking, his big bow was already in his hand, and 4 long golden spiritual energy arrows appeared in the gaps between the 5 fingers of his right hand. The bow was full, and the 4 arrows left the bowstring, breaking through the water with a whistling sound caused by the strong rotation. Davindoka said, "Ming Luo, how is it?" Ming Luo put the big bow on his back, and his face still had the same petrified expression, as if he didn't care about the result. 1 arrow hit, but it couldn't cause much damage to it. Davindoka knew that he couldn't blame Ming Luo. After all, the resistance in the water couldn't be compared to on land. It was already good that he could slightly injure the vacuum whirl-toothed shark. If it weren't for his super long-range attack power and the strong anti-resistance skill of the ripping arrow, it would be a problem to hit the target. Well done, Davindoka still praised. He said to himself, "She's indeed the daughter of the Sanctuary Guild's president. She can even cultivate the vacuum whirl-toothed shark for her own use. TSK. Leader, what should we do now?" The deputy beside him asked hurriedly. "I don't have a sea pet that can dive deeper and faster than the vacuum whirl-toothed shark, but..." His tone changed, and he said confidently, "The vacuum whirl-toothed shark also has 2 shortcomings. First, it can coexist with the sea demons, but when it carries people in its stomach, it will be attacked by the sea demons. This is why Victoria didn't use it to return to the water capital, and instead took a boat. Pay attention to 1 point. They might be the ones to attack if there's a big movement. Second, the vacuum whirl-toothed shark has to come up to the surface to breathe every once in a while, otherwise Victoria and the others in its stomach will suffocate. This is a fatal point. It won't be so easy to escape from our hands. Hee." The deputy frowned and said in confusion, "Leader, according to what you said, its speed is so fast that the sea pets can't keep up. Although the eagle is fast enough, it dives too deep, and we can't find its tracks. How are we going to track it?" "Don't worry, I have my ways." Davindoka seemed to have a plan in mind, and he turned his gaze to Philip. Chapter 398. The tomb maggot took out a black maggot with a small suction cup on its head and a red tentacle on its mouth. He said proudly, "This is a parasitoid mayfly, a sea maggot that lives by parasitizing the vacuum whirl-toothed shark. It has a strange ability to sense the vacuum whirl-toothed shark. As long as it is within a radius of 10 miles, it can easily find the shark's whereabouts through its tentacles. Let the eye eagle lead the way, and Victoria and the others won't be able to hide." "Ha!" Amidst his wild laughter, he threw the parasitoid mayfly to Davindoka and said, "I'll leave the tracking to you guys. I'm not interested." It sounded strange that Philip, who loved to show off, would say something like this. However, those who knew him well, such as Min Luo and Davindoka, did not find it strange. Many flying pets were the nemesis of maggots. So Philip, who had the ability to control maggots, had always felt an inexplicable disgust and aversion toward flying pets. Davindoka, Min Luo, and a few other pirates each mounted an eye-eagle. He said slowly, "We'll snipe from the front. Everyone else, follow us at full speed." Then, he drove the eye-eagle in the direction of the parasitoid mayfly's tentacles. Seeing that the god of plagues had left, everyone on the ship was greatly relieved. However, they soon found that Philip was coming back to UU with 2 magic octopuses. They could not help but hold their breaths nervously. Everyone was afraid of this bad-tempered, bloodthirsty, and ferocious demon. Philip jumped onto the ship's bow as the thickest wave of stench that even the sea breeze could not dispel hit them. Looking at him closely, he looked even more hideous and terrifying. Rotten flesh, white bones, and blue veins, as well as the sores that were flowing with green liquid, were all examples of the exact meaning of the word disgusting. Many passengers felt their stomachs churn even more violently, but they could only hold back their vomiting for fear of getting into trouble. What was even worse was that the dozen or so maggots that had fallen from Philip's body were slowly crawling towards the crowd. Everyone had seen the tragic death of the witch and knew how terrifying these small maggots were. The more cowardly one's legs began to tremble, but they didn't dare to step on these small maggots to death in case they angered Philip. Philip glanced around the crowd, his beady eyes shining. He was very satisfied with the deterrent effect. Only through such a perverted method could he hide the inferiority in his heart. Wang Jinxing secretly cursed. Suppressing the fear in his heart, he braced himself and said, "Your leader once said that as long as we hand over UG, we'll let the others go. Why you can't go back on your word? Shut up, old man, or I'll kill you right now." Philip flew into a rage. "Are you blind? Did you hand over the person we want? They ran out on their own, so the exchange is not valid." The Black Skeleton Pirates also had strict discipline, so Philip was still deeply afraid of Davindoka. That was why he had racked his brains to come up with a reason. Although it was a fallacy, it was indeed difficult to refute. For a moment, the atmosphere became tense again. Wang Jianxing gritted his teeth and said, Then what do you want?" Philip chuckled and said, "Relax, I'm not an unreasonable person who wants to kill everyone. First, I have to find the guy who killed 2 of my high-level blood explosion bugs. Second, and most importantly, hand over UG." The passengers were in an uproar again. They could understand the first one, but they couldn't understand the second one. Wang Jianxing said angrily, "She already left just now. It's not like you didn't see it." He thought that Philip was just making things difficult for him. Philip snorted and said, "No, my bugs told me that her smell hasn't subsided. In other words, she's still on the ship. Hee hee." As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd immediately went into an uproar. Everyone's gazes shifted back and forth between each other, expressing their suspicions about the identity of the companion beside them. The delicate and pretty young man called Tian Yuan, who was beside Reynolds, had a change in expression, but it was gone in a flash. Philip revealed a cunning smile that was uglier than crying and said slowly, "Summon everyone on the ship, including ordinary people, women, and children. Maybe she's among them." Reynolds frowned. It seemed that this unexpected storm would not stop for the time being. That UG, what was going on with the Black Skeleton Pirates in the sanctuary where she was? Was he going to stay or not? Very soon, all the passengers gathered on the ship, including martial artists, commoners, cooks, the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled, women, and children. All of them were brought out without exception. Seeing Philip's inhuman and terrifying appearance, the children's eyes were filled with terror, but their mouths were tightly covered by their fathers or mothers, unable to cry out. Very good, very good. As long as you cooperate obediently, you can save your lives." Philip laughed strangely. Reynolds gritted his teeth. It seemed that he couldn't get away, so he might as well stay and see what kind of tricks he could play. Philip's gaze moved around the crowd in front of him, and he finally said slowly, "Next, UG, come out yourself." Silence. No one spoke, and no one moved. Philip continued, "I'll say it again. UG, come out immediately." This time, there was still no response. Philip, who didn't get anything, was not disappointed. On the contrary, a hint of excitement flashed in his eyes. "UG, you didn't hear what I said, did you?" As he spoke, his gaze intentionally drifted towards Reynolds, but Reynolds felt that he wasn't looking at him. Reynolds looked at Tion Yuan beside him, deep in thought. "Very good. Hee, I hate trouble, so I'll have to use some simpler methods." Amidst his sinister laughter, Philip suddenly raised his hand, and then a white light suddenly flew out, drilling into the mouth of an ox warrior only 3 meters in front of him. This move came without warning. That warrior was caught off guard and immediately swallowed the white light into his stomach. He scratched his throat inexplicably in horror. He wanted to spit it out. However, everything was in vain. Not long after, the ox warrior screamed loudly, his face distorted, and like a blind fly, he held his head and ran around crazily. And he used a lot of strength, flipping a few people around him to the ground. The others all dodged, afraid that they couldn't avoid him in time. The warrior stumbled to the side of the ship and crashed into the fence. At this moment, he was no different from a madman and didn't know how to use protective fighting aura. Therefore, this was not light, and his head was broken and bleeding. However, the warrior crawled up from the ground as if he had been freed. He used his head to slam down on the iron fence again and again, as if he didn't know pain at all. Even when his forehead was badly mutilated and blood flowed onto the deck, he didn't have any intention of stopping. Chapter 399. Everyone stared at this shocking scene with their mouths agape. They felt a chill in their hearts. It was obvious that the white light that Philip shot out was a deadly bug. It invaded the body of the ox warrior. No matter how strong the beast bodies were, their internal organs were still weak. They could only let the bug do whatever it wanted. His abnormal actions showed the pain of his head colliding with a hard object. Compared to the bug, it was much lighter and could be used as a distraction. Many people knew what happened to the ox warrior and couldn't bear to see it. However, they couldn't help but want to see it. Philip's killing method could be said to be an art. It was disgusting but filled with a strange charm. It was like a horror movie that made people both love and fear it. Children's eyes were tightly covered by adults in case their young hearts couldn't bear it. Cheek, there was a soft sound. A hole opened up in the ox warrior's head and blood spurted into the sky. He fell to the ground and stopped moving after twitching a few times. A white and fat insect, which looked like a centipede with thousands of legs, wriggled its fat body and crawled out of his head. It squeaked a few times, as if it was very satisfied with this delicious meal. The warrior had fallen to the ground, facing the crowd. A scout from the three-eyed race mustered up his courage to look at the warrior, only to see that the warrior's head was completely empty. There was no brain matter at all. The scout could not help but shudder and almost fell to the ground. It seemed that the insect had sucked all the brain matter out of the warrior. Philip waved his hand, and that bug bent all its limbs and shot back into the maggot's body with a strong force. Philip licked his lips and looked satisfied after killing someone. "UG, are you still planning to hide?" Everyone was shocked and angry, but they didn't dare to show it. Otherwise, they might follow in the ox warrior's footsteps. In the face of extreme fear, they chose to escape. They transferred their anger and uneasiness from the murderer to the original victim who brought this disaster. "UG, who is UG? Come out quickly. Don't implicate us. Because of you, enough people have died now. Check the occupation token. You idiot. Does the daughter of the sanctuary's president need an occupation token? What did you say? Who are you scolding?" In the face of the enormous pressure of death, the people began to panic. They even began to quarrel with each other, and some even wanted to fight. A hint of hesitation and reluctance appeared on Tom's face, alternating between green and white. However, he took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. Renaud was furious. He looked at Philip and wanted to raise the bracelet several times. However, Reynolds knew that no matter which world he was in, the hunter would always shoot the bird that stuck out. He couldn't act rashly. In this world where the strong preyed on the weak, Reynolds had already seen too many cruel things. His recklessness and impulsiveness were slowly worn away by the ruthless reality, replaced by the necessary calm thinking required for survival. According to his deduction, Philip already knew that UG was still on the ship. The reason why Davindoka was transferred away was probably to take all the credit for himself. Reynolds was even certain that he should be able to easily find UG in the crowd through the insects. The reason why he chose the complicated over the simple was just to obtain an excuse that could casually satisfy his desire to kill. While achieving his goal, it also created a valuable opportunity for Reynolds, because Philip didn't expect that among the surviving warriors who were either dead, injured, or disabled, there were several masters who were even enough to kill him and the two complete pirate teams. However, Reynolds could only allow him to wreak havoc for now, because Davindoka hadn't gone too far. The pirates must have a signal flare as a way to contact them. If he acted rashly, they would return immediately, and that would be troublesome. Therefore, Reynolds could only wait until he thought that the distance between the two was far enough, and that he had enough time to get rid of the pirates who saw the signal flare. Hee. Still unwilling to show yourself? That's great. Philip's perverted smile reappeared, and then he opened his mouth. He spat out a green viscous liquid. The target this time was a little girl in the arms of her mother. She was at most 1 year old and couldn't even walk yet. It was obvious that Philip was an inhumane person. In his eyes, everyone could be killed at will, regardless of age or gender. They were all the same. No, the little girl's mother cried out. The green liquid was too fast, and the area it covered was too wide. Holding the child, she was too slow to avoid it. At the moment of life and death, the greatness of motherhood was fully displayed. She chose to sacrifice herself. She pushed her child to the side, and the pile of green viscous liquid stuck to her body, from head to toe, all over her body. As if she had touched a strong acid, her clothes and skin began to corrode quickly. Melting into thick water, the intensity of her pain could be imagined. However, a shocking scene appeared. The mother, who had no fighting ability, didn't cry out in pain that might have been worse than what the ox warrior had suffered just now. She endured the inhuman torture and turned her face away. She didn't want the child to see her terrible appearance, and then she begged Philip, "Please, let my child go. I beg you, just kill me, don't hurt her." Philip's expression was extremely cruel. Come here. If you can come to me, I'll promise you." At this time, the mother's foot muscles began to fester. She couldn't stand on the ground, and her nerves were severely damaged, so there was no doubt that she had completely lost the ability to walk. However, she used her hands that weren't stained with the viscous liquid to replace her feet, and with all her strength, she crawled towards Philip with difficulty and determination. The corrosion of the muscles continued, and the mother had already become a person whose face couldn't be distinguished. Behind her was a long trail of blood, but she still stubbornly crawled towards her target. Philip was also very surprised. Even a strong barbarian like him wouldn't be able to move at this time, even if he didn't die from this attack. However, this weak commoner had created a miracle that ordinary people couldn't. Seeing that she was getting closer and closer, Philip began to regret his rare kindness. If the mother had really done it, then she, who had protected her child, would have died without any worries. This was unacceptable to Philip, who liked to make people die in pain. However, in front of so many people and subordinates, he couldn't go back on his words. Otherwise, he would lose his prestige. All the passengers held their breaths and shot their gazes towards the mother, their hearts full of admiration. Even the warriors were no exception. They had seen a mysterious power. It turned out that commoners could sometimes be so powerful, but through a method that wasn't inferior to violence. Chapter 400. In the end, the mother still managed to crawl in front of Philip. She was only one step away, but her hands were fixed in the air, trembling, as if she was about to use the power of burning her life. But in the end, she still failed and fell down powerlessly. "You failed," he. In the midst of his maniacal laughter, Philip pounced on the young girl who had lost her sense of security because her mother was not by her side. Countless maggots poured out of his body. Philip opened his arms and made a hugging gesture. "Good girl, don't cry. Come, let me hug you." He did not show mercy because of her young age. On the contrary, he planned to use even more inhumane means to obtain pleasure. "Stop!" At least 3 people shouted at the same time, including Tom. He was already unable to suppress his anger. He could not stand by and watch this evil spirit viciously attack a young child. However, when he used all his strength to activate swift wind and rush out of the crowd to stop him, a figure flashed past him even faster. The figure ignored the terrifying maggots and grabbed Philip's hands tightly like lightning. Furthermore, this person was still a young man. Just when Philip was half a meter away from the girl, his vision blurred. There was another person in front of him who grabbed his arms. "Enough." Reynolds spat out 2 words coldly. Although it was really better to avoid trouble now, Reynolds really couldn't bear it anymore. After eating the royal family's secret medicine that Elena gave him, all of his attributes had been improved. Speed, strength, resistance, and healing ability had been greatly improved, but it was only temporary. Just when he was about to taste the wonderful taste of killing people again, someone suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He could not think of anyone who dared to meddle in other people's business after seeing his tyrannical power. But he knew that no matter who this person was, he had to die. But when Philip raised his head and saw a pair of eyes, instead, he shivered. The eyes were not angry, but they were lifeless, as if they were dead. Philip had an illusion that the owner of the eyes came from the underworld and looked at him as if he was looking at a dead person. This feeling made him very uncomfortable and also made him determined to kill this person. But someone was one step ahead of him. Before Philip could do anything, Reynolds had already grabbed his arm and pulled him towards himself, while his right fist punched towards the ugly face. The 2 speeds were stacked together. If the thunderbolt landed on Philip's face, anyone would have a reason to see a rotten persimmon. That was the only thought left in Reynolds' mind. It was to use the most primitive and violent method to send this guy to the grave to atone for the crimes he had committed. Maggots were a type of battle-type beast tamers, similar to maggots and archers. They were both professions that feared close combat. Philip was firmly pinned down by Reynolds, and the situation was very unfavorable. But his subordinates did not seem to feel the crisis of their leader. He even watched the show with great interest. This showed that they had great confidence in Philip. Philip smiled mysteriously. Then his body suddenly swelled up and shot out a golden light. To be precise, it was a large swarm of golden-shelled insects that covered his face tightly. It was as if he was covered in a layer of dense scales, only revealing a pair of eyes. Ding! The fist collided with the scales, and the sound of metal clashing rang out. Reynolds' fist was also immediately bounced to the side. Yin-yang beetles, their shells are as hard as the sand spirits of the Wyvern Desert, and can also greatly reflect external forces. Their abdomens are shockingly tough, and can dissipate forces that cannot be completely reflected, protecting their master to the greatest extent. How about this layer of golden armor that is comparable to a magical beast's helmet? Philip proudly showed off his love beetles. "Young man, I admire your foolish courage, but you made a mistake, which is to compare me with a normal maggot. Therefore, you have to die." Amidst his sinister laughter, the golden armor on his body disintegrated and was replaced by a large swarm of pitch-black maggots that emitted a foul stench. There were so many of them that it was terrifying, and they continuously surged out. Amidst the cries of alarm, this swarm of insects stuck to Reynolds like locusts. Not long after, his entire body was covered with wriggling black insects, like a black cloud, disgusting and terrifying. "Reynolds, are you all right?" Tom was furious and could not hold back any longer. He rushed over like an arrow. But at this moment, the situation changed. Philip's wild laughter came to an abrupt end, because he also discovered that the other party's grip was still so strong, like an iron hoop. Then he saw that the maggots on Reynolds's body were swallowed up one by one, and then they disappeared without a trace, and his body slowly revealed itself again. Philip's mung bean eyes widened, and his face was full of disbelief. Impossible, impossible, unless your strength is much higher than mine. Otherwise, the speed at which you release the protective spiritual power cannot be faster than my baby's absorption. At this moment, he saw a layer of transparent, crystal-like substance on the surface of Reynolds's body, and suddenly said, "Boundary Master, you are also a Boundary Master." Thinking of this, he was greatly relieved. The person in front of him was very likely to be both a Boundary Master and a Demon Master. Although it was very rare, Boundary Masters were auxiliary combat professions. Boundaries could only be used for defense and could not be used for attack. As long as he was not an expert who could rely on strength to shake off the maggots on his body, but an ordinary Demon Master, with that pitiful attack power, he would not be able to hurt him. But he had some doubts in his heart. Where did his insects go? Just as Philip calmed down and was thinking of a way to break that layer of boundary, an inexplicable sense of fear attacked his heart. Insects had a keen sense of danger, and Philip, who had the ability of insects, was also keen. This kind of feeling was rarely wrong. So at this moment, Philip felt that the opponent in front of him might be far more terrifying than he had imagined. He immediately gave up the idea of attacking and planned to keep a certain distance from this person, but at this moment, he felt a sharp pain in his hand. Then, Reynolds's cold voice came. "Philip, you also made a stupid mistake. What's on my body is not a boundary. This is a terrifying existence that you cannot imagine." Crack! The sound of bones breaking rang out, followed by Philip's blood-curdling scream. His wrist bones were actually broken, and the layer of golden armor that Philip was full of confidence in was also shattered. Philip looked at his limp wrist, and his heart was full of horror. He finally tasted the pain that he had let others taste just now. Reynolds' own strength was not enough to easily destroy the Yin-Yang beetle's golden armor. The peach blossom burial was indeed a deadly poison, and it was still effective on this kind of insect, causing the insect's golden armor to slowly soften and collapse. In addition, with the support of the Babika royal family's supreme secret medicine, the power could be said to be unstoppable in a short period of time. Chapter 4:01. Philip, go die. Go to the underworld and atone for the innocent people you cruelly killed. While laughing coldly, Reynolds's right index finger poked towards the space between Philip's eyebrows. "Ah!" Philip screamed and actually tore his wrist off from Reynolds's hand. Two maggots used cruel methods to deal with others to deal with themselves. Philip, who had been through a lot, could tell that this was the only way to escape at this critical moment. Otherwise, he would only die. As expected of an old fox who had been through a lot, he was actually able to endure the incomparable pain of his broken bones and took the opportunity to retreat. Of course, the speed of his retreat was not as fast as Reynolds's finger, so he quickly released a group of stingers, a kind of small insect that could injure the enemy with the sharp spikes on the top of its head. The last way to break the barrier was to attack. This was a method that everyone knew. Philip planned to use offense as a defense and fight for the best opportunity to escape. Judging from that faint layer of barrier, his opponent's ability as a world spiritist shouldn't be too strong. Thus, he should be wary of him. To be on the safe side, Philip's stingers also attacked Reynolds' eyes, nether regions, and other vulnerable places. But he underestimated his opponent once again. The barrier on Reynolds' body turned dark and faintly carried a strange dark light, like a black hole. Philip saw this and knew that he was done for, because the change in color meant that the barrier's strength had increased, and that layer of dark light gave him a feeling of death. For a moment, Philip seemed to see countless wraiths appear in front of him. They were crazily screaming and devouring his soul. Cheat! A light sound rang out, but it was Philip's death knell. His skull and his golden armor were pierced through by Reynolds' index finger filled with anger, and his brain splattered everywhere. Philip's eyes were wide open, and his heart was unreconciled as he fell straight back, ending his ugly life. Reynolds nonchalantly wiped the red and white stuff off his finger on his clothes and said indifferently, "You're lucky you don't have to suffer any pain." He originally did not plan to let Philip escape so quickly, but time forced him to end the battle quickly. Moreover, Philip's strength wasn't that weak. He was just arrogant and underestimated his opponent. If he managed to escape and pull him to a long-range battle, it would be a little troublesome. The unforeseen event happened so quickly and suddenly. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, Reynolds, who was supposed to be dead for sure, turned the tables and gained the absolute upper hand. The arrogant Philip was easily killed, and many passengers were unable to react in time. At this moment, Renault's entire body was like a deflated balloon, falling onto the deck with a plop. "Reynolds!" Tom hurried over and helped Reynolds up. "How are you? Are you okay?" Looking at Tom's concerned eyes, Reynolds waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. It's just a side effect of the medicine." Tom released Reynolds, and after confirming that he was really fine, he shouted, "Captain, set off immediately, full speed in the opposite direction of Davindoka. Those who still have the ability to fight, do your best to kill all the pirates on the ship as soon as possible. Don't let them fire the signal flare." Like the passengers on the ship, the pirates were also shocked by the sudden change. Although it was hard for them to believe the facts in front of them, they had rich experience in licking blood from their blades all day long. Soon, they woke up as if from a dream. Before Townsend and the others could react, they already knew that things were not going well. In a battle with few people, the role of a super strong person was reflected. As long as there were one or two leaders and some help, it would be enough to defeat the remaining two teams. Moreover, the strength of that strong person was unfathomable. It was indeed terrifying to be able to kill Philip in an instant. "Attention, archers. Try your best to shoot down the signal flare," Tom shouted as he swept towards the nearest pirate. The battle began, but it didn't last long. After a short period of chaos, a signal flare that broke through the archers' sniping finally flew over the sea with a brilliant light and a whistling sound. Tom was powerless to stop it, and Reynolds had already expected this result. He was just doing his best. In the current situation, he could only settle for the next best thing. So he ordered all the pirates to be swept off the ship like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Of course, it wasn't that these pirates were too weak, or that they were so cowardly that they couldn't resist. As long as they could become a pirate, they were all strong people. To be exact, many of them jumped into the sea voluntarily. Although they had lost their leader, this group of old and cunning fellows still thought of the wisest response, which was to keep an eye on the ship's whereabouts, and then wait for the main force to rush back before making any plans. It would be stupid not to use such a great advantage and stay on the ship to fight to the death. Therefore, instead of chasing with all their might, the pirates rode on the chimera magic octopus and followed closely behind. They shouted loudly from afar, but they didn't attack. However, when the deep-sea giant whale slowed down, they slowed down as well, keeping a certain distance between them and the others. The deep-sea giant whale was huge and cumbersome. After all, its speed couldn't be compared to the chimera magic octopus, which was a small sea pet with strong flexibility. Therefore, even if everyone followed Reynolds' suggestion and let the ordinary people who had no combat power join the ranks of the sailors to speed up, they still couldn't completely shake off the pirates. The situation wasn't optimistic. "Sir, what should we do now? If this goes on, Davindoka and the others will catch up sooner or later." Townsend wiped the sweat from his forehead and worriedly asked Reynolds and Tom, who were standing at the stern to observe. Although it was only for a moment, Reynolds had established his prestige through thunderous means. In this world, everything was built on strength. Moreover, Reynolds' subordinate, due to the difference in strength, the captain mistakenly thought that Reynolds was Reynolds' servant or something, gave a calm and wise order. His meticulous view of the overall situation was convincing. Therefore, unknowingly, Reynolds and Tom had become the leaders and spiritual pillars that everyone followed. Although Townsend was the captain, he was still a non-combat professional. His rich experience couldn't make up for the lack of strength in his analysis of the battle situation. It was just that there was no one in a hurry, so he had to take on the heavy responsibility. Now, there was a strong person that he could rely on. He couldn't ask for more. However, it was still Townsend who gave the orders. After all, he was very familiar with everything on the ship and could improve efficiency. Reynolds frowned and didn't speak. He also had a headache about the unfavorable situation in front of him. He originally thought that he could take advantage of the chaos to kill some of the pirates. However, the pirates' cunning was beyond his imagination. The fierce them actually knew to collectively give up resistance and jump into the sea to escape. There were only 7 or 8 corpses of pirates on the deck. They were left behind by the unlucky ones who were closer to Reynolds and Tom. The others ran away. For the two teams, with hundreds of people, losing a few people was still not enough to shake them. It could be said that they successfully retained most of their strength. This completely disrupted Reynolds' thoughts. Chapter 4:02. Considering all these factors, Reynolds realized that it would be impossible for him to kill the remaining pirates by force. He had to find another way. However, he could not think of a better way at the moment. He could only look at the fearless pirates who were still clamoring because of the magic octopus's speed and fell into deep thought. Townsend stared at Reynolds and Tom, feeling very nervous. Although he was anxious, he did not dare to interrupt his train of thought, because the lives of all the people on the ship might be tied to these two young men. An important figure of the Black Skeleton Pirates was killed, and those ferocious pirates were likely to vent their anger on the whole crew. Of course, Townsend did not blame Reynolds for implicating everyone. Philip's evil behavior of not even sparing women and children was truly infuriating. Any crew member with a little conscience would agree with Reynolds' actions and even admire his courage. This was also one of the reasons why he was able to gain everyone's trust in such a short period of time and become a well-deserved leader. Time always seemed to be very long when one was anxious, and Townsend deeply understood this point. Just as his nerves were on the verge of collapse, he finally saw Reynolds' tightly knitted brows relax. This was really exciting news, and it meant that he had a plan in mind. Whether or not it succeeded, it was better than being helpless and waiting for death. Captain, Townsend nodded repeatedly, as if he was listening to an emperor. Dear sir, what can I do for you? Well, please pass down the order. Tell everyone to work harder. Tell them that our signal for help has been fortunately seen by the second ship passing by, and we will soon receive help. Townsend's spirits were lifted. That's great. However, he soon realized that something was wrong. He suppressed his joy and changed it into a question. But sir, as far as I know, if there are no accidents, no passenger ship is passing by the nearby waters at this time. Merchant ships are most afraid of pirates, and they will not meddle in other people's business. At most, they will pass the message to a third party. Are you mistaken? Reynolds said lightly, Yes, there is no so-called help at all. Townsend was shocked. Then why are we? Reynolds interrupted him as if nothing had happened. It's okay, Captain Townsend. I think you should know that everyone can see that the pirate ship is still chasing after us. This situation is not good, and it will make them discouraged. Therefore, we have to give them some hope. Only with hope will there be motivation. Even if this hope is just a figment of our imagination, as long as we can achieve our goal, it will be fine. Mobilize everyone's strength as much as possible so that the Caragao can achieve its fastest speed. Only then can we gain precious time. Otherwise, Davindoka will catch up very soon. After that, he added, Of course, only you and I can know whether the news is true or false. This kind of white lie was the most effective at this time. Townsend, who understood Reynolds' painstaking efforts, sincerely admired him. It is indeed a brilliant plan. I didn't expect you to come up with it, sir. But his tone changed. Even so, we can only stall for time. It seems a little difficult to throw off the people behind us. Reynolds said with a gloomy expression, Let me think of a way to deal with this tale. Townsend's heart sank when he heard Reynolds' words. Reynolds' words revealed some hidden meaning. He was not sure if he could solve the biggest problem. Seeing this, Reynolds smiled and said, "Man proposes, but God disposes. As long as you work hard, you will have no regrets even if you die." "Yes, sir, I believe in you, and I believe that we will be able to escape. I believe in your noble words. The glory of the God of luck will shine on us." Townsend was infected by Reynolds's heroic heart that disregarded life and death. He became optimistic and even made a short prayer on the spot. It was a pity that he did not know one thing. Reynolds's fearlessness was based on the fact that he could directly enter the Apocalypse bracelet if he really could not protect the ship. Reynolds would try his best to save this group of people, but he wanted to have a clear conscience. However, if things really reached a point of no return, he would still have to continue being selfish and run away. "I'll pass the orders, sir. I'll leave this to you." The encouraged Townsend left with hope. He did not know Reynolds's identity and did not intend to ask. This kind of strong person would more or less have a little secret about his identity. However, it did not matter if he was a wanted criminal. At least for now, he was his partner, and his actions were worthy of respect. This was beyond doubt. Townsend, who had been sailing on the sea for many years, had a relatively vague concept of good and evil, or it could be said that he saw it very clearly. He only judged a person's character based on what he saw with his own eyes and not the country's wanted order. Seeing Townsend go away to spread the good news, Tom frowned and looked at Reynolds. He asked, "You said I'll leave this to you. What do you want to do? Your spiritual power is exhausted, and your physical strength is exhausted. We've already done our best. Why don't you hurry up and think of a way to escape?" Reynolds looked at him coldly and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Miss UG, tell me, why did they come capture you?" Tom was stunned. He looked at Reynolds and asked unnaturally, "Reynolds, you're still joking at a time like this?" Reynolds snorted and said, "You don't want to admit it?" Tom's expression changed. He was a little angry and asked, "Why did you say I'm UG? What evidence do you have?" Reynolds sighed. He sat up and stared straight at him. Suddenly, he revealed a strange smile. "Then don't blame me for being rude." What do you want to do?" Tom didn't react. In the next moment, he saw Reynolds's right hand touch his chest like lightning. What are you doing?" Tom's face instantly turned red. He covered his chest with his arms and looked at Reynolds hatefully. Reynolds smiled and spread his hands, saying, "I was right, aren't I? You still don't want to admit it?" Tom stood up with a cold face. He looked at Reynolds hatefully and went to the other side, away from Reynolds. Reynolds looked at his back and said to himself, "The fragrance on his body is so obvious. What a cute cross-dresser." In the silence, suddenly, the uncontrollable screams and messy footsteps of the people passed through the one-way soundproof barrier and into the two's ears. Reynolds and Tom looked at each other and ran out of the door at the same time. The weather of the ocean had become like a woman's face. It had started to rain outside at some point. The fierce wind brought with it raindrops. It hit people's faces until it hurt. The sky was a vast expanse of gray and connected with the ocean in the distance. It was impossible to tell which was the sky and which was the ocean. The situation on the surface of the water was terrible. Huge waves surged to the sky, shaking Fan Yu violently. Spirals of various sizes spun at high speed, mercilessly swallowing the white foam. Chapter 4:03. Countless Morngate fish, which represented bad luck, came out of the sea in the bad weather that humans hated the most, but they loved the most. Their white bellies were overturned, and their cries were even worse than that of crows, as if it was a funeral song from the depths of the netherworld. Morngate fish was a kind of strange sea monster that had almost no offensive ability and could only survive by eating corpses. However, it was one of the sea monsters that humans were most afraid of, because Morngate fish represented death, and the number of Morngate fish that appeared was the same as the number of lives that would be lost. As long as one lived near the sea, this rumor was firmly believed, and at this moment, people were once again citing this point. In the distance, a large group of skeleton flags could be seen. Just like the Morning Gate fish, they represented death. Townsend's face was ashen, and he muttered, "It's over, it's over." Renault hurried to his side and said, "Captain, the scouts report?" Townsend continued to talk to himself as if he did not see Renault at all and did not hear his question. He repeated the same sentence over and over again. "It's over, it's over." It can make him, who is used to seeing storms and waves, lose his will to live completely. It can be seen that the situation is serious. Renault did not hesitate to raise his hand and slap Townsend's face several times and said expressionlessly, "Captain, I need the scouts' report." No one dares to say the result until the last moment. Perhaps Renault's slaps had awakened Townsend, or perhaps Renault's calmness had restored the poor captain's confidence. Townsend forced himself to focus and said, "It's the Dark Knight Ghouling, the vice-captain of the Black Skull Pirates. Graf, the spirit impersonator of the three great messengers. There's also the Ghoul Grand Magician Bita Chalk, the Ghoul Thousand-Man Slayer, and the Ghoul Shadow Assassin Dien Nai, who is best at tracking." Townsend reported a long list of names that made people pale. In the end, his voice trembled a little, and he used all his strength to finish the last sentence. "Apart from this, the rest of the pirates are more than 3 times the number we encountered before." Renault sucked in a breath of cold air. He finally understood why Townsend had lost his composure. The lineup of this black skeleton pirates was far more luxurious than the previous time. On the other hand, they were left with a group of injured soldiers. It was not an exaggeration to say that the chances of victory in this battle were 0. The passengers and crew even completely lost the courage to escape. They just stared blankly at the ferocious skeleton flags that were getting clearer and clearer. "Leave no one alive." A calm and emotionless voice came through the storm. The deputy commander of the Black Skull Gang, Ghouling, gave the order to kill. Davindoka's failure made them adopt a safer method this time. At this moment, Reynolds's face was also incomparably pale as a trace of unwillingness appeared in his heart. They had already decided to die here together, but Reynolds's survival instincts still made him angry, unwilling, and fearful of the unknown. Should he use the Apocalypse Bracelet? Reynolds's expression was uncertain. Ghouling stood proudly on the bow of the main ship. He looked at the broken castle and the helpless people on the ship as if he was looking at a pile of corpses. He was full of confidence. Even if the other party's reinforcements arrived in time, they would not be able to change the fate of everyone on this ship being buried in the belly of the morning fish. At most, the number of corpses would only increase by a few more. Even if the reinforcements detected their formation, they might immediately be scared out of their wits and flee at the mere sight of the wind. When he thought of this, a faint smile unconsciously appeared at the corner of Ghouling's mouth. Returning to his hometown made him in a good mood. However, the development of things was always unexpected. An ignorant person suddenly appeared. It was a flying bird. That's right, a flying bird and a person. There was also a person standing on top of the flying bird. It flew close to the violent winds and raging waves. Those who saw it were shocked, but it was never hit by the waves. To be exact, it was not a flying bird, but a huge flying magical beast called the flower-winged eagle. This magical beast was extremely rare. It liked to live alone and liked to be high up in the sky. It hated humans and liked to capture humans for food. Very few people could tame it. This kind of magical beast usually appeared in the wilderness, in the mountains that were so high that the end could not be seen. If it appeared in this sea area, it would be fine. However, there was an extra person on its back. It appeared at the most inopportune time. It was so untimely. Both sides quickly discovered it, but the people's surprise was only fleeting. No one thought that such a person could change the current situation. People with good eyesight, wide knowledge, and a slightly more cautious mind might pay more attention. It was because everyone knew that although the flower-winged eagle was known for its speed and high-altitude flight, it was weak in the end. It was easy for it to be surrounded by archers. However, it came here safely, which meant that its owner must have extraordinary strength. In the storm, The person's appearance could be faintly seen. A pink long gauze wrapped around her body. A peerless face carved from jade was expressionless. Her long black hair fluttered in the sea breeze, but it was not messy. It was a woman. Guling was undoubtedly one of the people who paid more attention to her. He also found that this woman did not seem to be just passing by. She came from a side of both sides. As long as one was not blind, they should be able to see that both sides were at daggers drawn. A person who could ride a flower-winged eagle alone was not blind. Then she was meddling in other people's business. Guling frowned, but he did not stop his actions because of the sudden situation. At this time, he was already close to the archer's shooting range. Guling raised his right hand high, palm facing forward. This was a sign that the black skeletons were about to attack. The bowstring began to tighten. As soon as this hand fell, a dense swarm of spiritual arrows would fly out, turning the people on the Clark into porcupines. The incoming person sped up again. The flower-winged eagle was like an arrow that left the bow, riding the wind and breaking the waves, shooting straight over. Very quickly, it was not far from the main ship, the armored turtle, that Guling was on. Guling did not pay any more attention. Even if this person was an expert, he could not be strong enough to fight against half of the black skeletons. His hand dropped. Seeing that no one could stop this massacre, some of the people on the Clark had even closed their eyes, waiting for their inevitable fate. Even if they hid in their rooms, it would be useless because there were still a few charm masters in the enemy ranks. They could blow up the houses, but it would be better to die a quick death under the barrage of arrows and magic skills. At this time, 5 enormous blades of light that were more than 10 meters long and as bright as day descended from the sky. They wildly chopped down at the armored turtle. It was so dazzling, but what was shocking was not its extremely beautiful appearance, but the strength of the skill. It was not an exaggeration to say that the spiritual energy contained in such a large blade of light could be described as terrifying. Moreover, the power was filled with an indomitable, unstoppable force. Anyone who saw it would be able to feel this, 7 or 8 meters away. The blade chi that rushed over caused the skin on his face to faintly hurt. Chapter 404. His chest was stuffy, and he couldn't breathe properly. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on his body. The enchantment on the armored tortoise was cut open as fragile as tofu. Along with the powerful aura, there was a faint, soul-stirring cry. It was the cry of the legendary, strongest creature on the continent. Guling's experience was the deepest among everyone. She relied on the sharp judgment of an expert. With his sharp judgment, he had already discovered that these sword lights were coming for him. Even as the deputy captain of the Black Skeleton Pirates, Guling couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He knew very well that if he took it head-on, the consequences would be very serious, so serious that he didn't dare to imagine it. Therefore, Guling immediately made the wisest decision to hide. However, other than being strong, the speed of the 5 huge blade auras was also out of proportion to their size. They seemed to be slow, but they were actually very fast. They also contained a powerful sealing ability, like an invisible cage that tightly suppressed the people under the blade auras. No matter how Guling urged his amphibious mount, the 3-tailed spirit raccoon, it couldn't move. It could only let out a desperate cry. The 3-tailed spirit raccoon was a psychic creature. It had accompanied its master through countless life and death battles, so it had a keen sense of death. Therefore, its mournful cry gave Guling a bad premonition. The other Black Skeleton Pirates, including Spirit Imitation Graph, Thousand Manslayer, and the others, could only stand in place. They were shocked by the momentum of this move. The fear hidden deep in their hearts was dug out, suppressing their fierce pirate character. They only dared to look at their leader and didn't dare to help. This battle, which was originally a one-on-one battle, had evolved into a one-on-one battle. Guling gritted his teeth and raised his hand again to the top of his head. His famous weapon, the Dark Moon Spear, had appeared in his palm. Although he knew that it was disadvantageous to fight head-on, he had to use the most stupid method. Darkness shift. Guling shouted. His eyes were red, and all the muscles on his body bulged. He used his berserk body as support to speed up the gathering of his spiritual power. At the same time, the dark moon spear spun at an extremely high speed and disappeared. From afar, there seemed to be a black, oval vortex above Guling's head. Knights were a profession with an extremely strong defense, and the power of darkness was a power that could devour almost all other types of spiritual energy. A dark knight with these two attributes combined would have an abnormal defensive power. Darkness transfer was a high-level defensive skill unique to dark knights. It had high density, high speed, and high strength. It could negate the power of the enemy's attacks by devouring, transferring, and resisting. It was also the ultimate defensive skill that Guling was proud of. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the 5 bright red blade lights and Guling. At this moment, they had forgotten everything. They only wanted to know the result of this shocking battle. Was it the sharpness of the blade or the toughness of the shield? The expected vigorous resistance scene did not appear. After a flash of red light, the saber light and the vortex disappeared at the same time. Guling sat quietly on her mount as if nothing had happened. This situation lasted for 5 seconds. Just when everyone thought that the saber light and darkness transfer had canceled each other out, Guling's body silently split from the middle, from head to toe, into 2 halves. Then, the 3-tailed flashing spirit mink under him was also evenly divided into 6 halves. The most shocking thing was not over yet. The shell of the armored tortoise, which was as hard as steel and several meters thick, also split open from the middle. The seawater rushed in and the armored tortoise sank. The pirates on it woke up as if they had just woken up from a dream and fell into the sea in a mess. "We're saved. God bless us. Goddess." The passengers on the huge ship were in a mess. They shouted and shouted as they looked at the battlefield in the distance. It was Leah. Reynolds was overjoyed as he looked at the woman in the distance. That's right. Only Leah had such great power. But who is she? Why did she save us? I seem to have seen this woman somewhere before. Leah. She's Leah, the famous valley master of Flower Burial Valley. What? Flower Burial Valley? That's right. It's that independent place. It's famous in the entire King's Realm. Only she has an exclusive mount, the flower-winged eagle. The black skeleton pirates are defeated and collapsed on their own. Although their collective strength should be able to compete with Leah, they did not have enough courage. This shocking attack had really scared these pirates out of their wits. Even Guling had been defeated. Who could be sure that Leah would not launch another attack like this? No one gambled with their lives. This group of pirates, known as the strongest in the sea, ended in their first operation after returning to the old sea area in fear. Leah stood on the back of the flower-winged eagle and gradually approached the Clark. Everyone on the ship held their breaths as they watched this powerful woman fly towards them. She was like a fairy descending from the sky. If she had not saved them, the entire ship would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. Everyone would have died. At this moment, everyone's eyes were filled with deep reverence as they looked at Leah. They did not even dare to move. The flower-winged eagle slowly flew above the deck and stopped. Its huge wings slowly swayed. Leah jumped down from the flower-winged eagle's back. Her speed was not fast. It seemed that she had used some kind of wind magic. Leah jumped to the ground at a slow speed. She was extremely gentle and did not make a sound. Everyone consciously retreated, leaving a large open space for Leah. They looked at her and did not dare to say a word. Everyone unanimously expressed their respect for Leah in this way. Leah frowned her beautiful eyebrows and looked at the crowd. She saw a familiar person, so she walked towards him. When she walked in front of Reynolds, Leah revealed a rare smile and said, "Reynolds, you're still alive." Reynolds looked at Leah in front of him, his heart filled with emotions. Leah was the first hero he met when he first came to the King's Realm. He had a lot of connections with her. At least, his life was saved by Leah and the treasure she gave him. And the most important thing was that he paid her Edido. Reynolds touched his nose, and for a moment, tears welled up in his eyes. It had been almost half a year since he came to this world. What he had experienced, he would never experience on Earth. It was this place that allowed him to grow quickly, broaden his horizons, and broaden his mind. Well, I'm still alive. It's really fortunate to be able to see you alive. Reynolds showed a heartfelt smile. Leah also restored her original cold expression and asked, "Are you going Chong in local government?" Chapter 405. Reynolds nodded and asked eagerly, "Yes, Leah, I want to ask, how is Eddie?" Although Eddie had been chatting with him every day for a while, Reynolds still wanted to get accurate information from Leah. Leah thought for a moment, and for the first time, her expression showed a hint of mischief. She said, "You're asking about Eddie after a few sentences. I'm not going to tell you." Huh? This time, Reynolds was dumbfounded. Looking at Leah, who was mischievously holding back her laughter, was this still the cold and aloof Leah he remembered? Reynolds rubbed his eyes, not knowing what to say. "Is the captain here?" Leah asked at this time. The rescue this time was just a spur of the moment, or rather, it was not a spur of the moment. Instead, these annoying pirates and sea beasts that made loud noises were blocking her way. So she got rid of them? However, there was an unexpected gain. She met her previous savior, her benefactor, Reynolds. Leah tilted her head. She was not sure what she was really thinking. Well, just take it as a spur of the moment. At this time, a person walked over from the crowd. "Honorable Valley Master Leah," Wang Jinxing replied, flattered. He crossed his hands in front of his chest and performed the most important salute at sea before saying, "I am the captain of this ship, Wang Jinxing. On behalf of all the guests on the ship, I sincerely thank you for your rescue." Although he did not know why Leah would help, he did not dare to ask. However, he didn't dare to ask. In front of an expert, he only had the right to answer. Moreover, he looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. She seemed to have a compelling temperament, which was completely incomparable to ordinary people. Wang Jinxing sighed. He had never met such a beautiful woman in his life. Leah nodded slightly and said, "Well, it's nothing." After saying that, she tilted her head again, as if thinking about something. This action in front of Reynolds was really cute, full of a kind of contrast cuteness. Leah pointed at Reynolds and said, "Come with me. I have something to say to you." After saying that, she walked toward the cabin in the distance. Reynolds was startled and hurriedly followed. At this time, all the people on the deck who were rescued were talking. "This woman is so beautiful. Rumor has it that no one has ever seen the true face of the Flower Burial Valley's Valley Master. Who would have thought that he would have such a peerless appearance? Look at that woman in my house. Damn it, alas. Ha ha, it's better if you don't have such crooked thoughts. Be careful not to be heard, and I'll kill you." Leah walked slowly, looking at the huge ship. She touched the wooden wall with her right hand and entered a room. After Reynolds came in, she closed the door. The window of this room faced the Sky Phoenix Sea. When the window was opened, one could clearly feel the sea breeze blowing and smell the salty smell of the sea. He felt relaxed and happy. Leah sat on the boat and began to size up Renault. Reynolds stood there and thanked Leah solemnly. "Leah, thank you for saving me. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid the entire ship would have sunk. Everyone will die." Leah said, "There's nothing to thank me for. Saving you and this ship was just a whim of mine." Pausing for a moment, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, You should also have that thing called mobile phone? Something like that, right?" "Well, yes, it's a mobile phone." Reynolds was stunned for a moment and then understood. Eddie and Leah got along very well, so he must have told Leah about the mobile phone. Nodding, he took out his mobile phone from his trouser pocket. It was his mobile phone. Then he handed it to Leah. Leah took it and frowned her beautiful eyebrows again. She fiddled with it, and a trace of unhappiness flashed across her face. Looking at Reynolds, she said, "I don't know how to do it." Reynolds couldn't help but laugh. He quickly took it and pressed the power button. In an instant, the screen lit up. Leah looked at the screen and said, "Do it for me. I want to see your chat history with Eddie." Reynolds simply sat beside Leah, opened WeChat, and clicked on the chat interface with warm wine and hot eyebrows. The content of the chat was still what he said a few days ago. Recently, he didn't say anything. He just wanted to hurry to Chong, an academy, and see Eddie's appearance. He was really worried about her. Aaron, I'm going to Chong, an academy. Aaron, I want to protect you. I must let us return to the original world. Aaron, I don't know how you are. I'm really worried about you. Leah casually flipped through the chat history and then looked at Reynolds with kindness in her eyes. She said, Eddie is a lovely child. You must treat her well. Reynolds nodded and said, Of course. Leah, you can understand. Lin Ling and I. In this world, we are the only people who depend on each other. Leah showed a satisfied expression and returned the phone to Reynolds. She said, Lin Ling told me a lot of stories about your world. There are tall buildings, cars, trains, mobile phones, games, King of Glory. Well, it seems that I'm a character in the game King of Glory. I'm inexplicably unhappy. Reynolds nodded carefully and looked at Leah. He didn't expect her to be so receptive to new things. Lin Ling must have brainwashed Leah a lot. Well, what is the universe? Is the king's realm also included in the universe? Is your Earth also a world in the universe? Leah began to ask again. I can't explain it clearly. Or rather, the world I'm in still can't explain it clearly. Reynolds replied. This was true. No matter how advanced Earth's technology was, it was impossible to know the truth of the universe. At least for now, it was impossible. Leah sighed. As expected, you don't know either. Lin Ling also said the same thing. Hearing about Lin Ling, Reynolds asked again, Leah, is Lin Ling okay? Is she getting along well with you? Very well. You can rest assured about this. Nothing will happen to Ling. She is now at Chong, an academy, and has started another journey. Reynolds was a little anxious and asked, Then why did she ignore me when I sent her a message? Leah was silent for a while and said, Well, you will have to find out by yourself. Reynolds was silent and put the phone away. Tell me, now that there are wars everywhere on the continent, how did you survive such a chaotic world? Leah looked at Reynolds with interest and asked. Reynolds didn't hide anything and started to talk about all his adventures and all the people he knew after he separated from Leah. Leah's beautiful eyes were fixed on Reynolds as she listened to him talk about his experiences. After a while, Leah said, What a lucky man. Reynolds smiled bitterly and said, Yes, thinking about it carefully, it is really a miracle that I survived. Chapter 406. Leah thought for a moment, then extended her hand to Reynolds and said, Give me the fishbowl sword. Reynolds was stunned, then immediately understood. He took out the fishbowl sword from the Apocalypse bracelet and handed it to Leah. Leah took it and played with it a few times, gently stroking it. She looked at Reynolds' bracelet and asked, You said you don't know where this bracelet came from? Yes, it's very strange. I was ambushed and didn't die after a sword pierced my chest. It was all because of this bracelet, Reynolds said, trying hard to recall his past adventures. Just a few days ago, I heard from Lady Black Scorpion that this was something from the sanctuary. Reynolds carefully considered his words, hesitated, and still did not tell Leah about the underworld and the bracelet. Living in the other world for a long time made Reynolds more cautious. He could not trust anyone, and should be somewhat suspicious and vigilant of everyone. Leah fell into deep thought and muttered to herself, Lady Black Scorpion. Reynolds looked at Leah and carefully continued. She also said that if I could meet you, she wanted me to tell you that she had let it go. Leah was silent. She looked at Reynolds and said, I'm afraid Lady Black Scorpion still doesn't know that the Flower Burial Valley has changed owners. Reynolds did not say anything more. The more he spoke, the more likely he would make mistakes. Who knew if he said something wrong that would make Leah unhappy and bring a fatal disaster to himself? Anyway, he had already delivered Lady Black Scorpion's last wish. Just as the two were chatting, there was a knock on the door. Reynolds opened the door, and outside was Captain Wang Jinxing. He had a reserved and fearful look on his face, as if he was uneasy about interrupting the conversation between Leah and Reynolds. But he still said, I'm very sorry to disturb you too. I want to inform you that the pirates on the sea are about to escape. Valley Master Leah, Mr. Reynolds, What do you two mean? Hearing Wang Jinxing's words, it seemed that he was begging Leah to kill all the pirates. And the strength that Leah had displayed was enough to eliminate them completely. There was no doubt about this. People on the sea were most afraid of encountering pirates. Now that there was such a strong person overseeing, naturally he would beg. How could Leah not understand Wang Jinxing's purpose? She sneered and said, I can save you on a whim, but I can also cut you into pieces on a whim. Cold sweat broke out on Wang Jinxing's face. At this moment, he hurriedly bowed and apologized. I'm very sorry, Valley Master Leia. I spoke too much. Scram. Hearing Leah's ice-cold voice, Wang Jinxing hurriedly closed the door and escaped. Reynolds looked at Leah and felt her imposing aura. He was full of admiration. Amazing. Your power is almost on par with Athena's. So far, the only powerful people Reynolds had met were Athena, Bai Chi, Marshal Zero, Sulai, and Leah. Reynolds had witnessed the strength of these people with his own eyes. However, when Leah heard Reynolds' words, her expression immediately changed. She looked at Reynolds coldly and asked, What did you say? Are you saying that my strength is inferior to that woman's? Reynolds looked at Leah's murderous gaze and immediately reacted. He hurriedly explained, That's not what I meant. I'm saying that you're very strong in the world. Leah snorted and said, You're quite lucky with women. You've done many things with Athena. Reynolds sighed and said, No. If you dare to find another woman besides Lin Ling, I'll throw you into the peach blossom burial. Absolutely not. Reynolds looked at Leah's threatening gaze and was somewhat happy. From her words, he knew that Lin Ling had not forgotten him with the passage of time. It seemed that Lin Ling had been talking to Leah about him and the things on Earth every day. And Leah seemed to not be so ruthless to him because of Lin Ling. Leah handed the Yuchong sword to Reynolds. Reynolds said curiously, This is yours. Don't you want it? Leah said, This sword is the key to the Flower Burial Valley. Keep it and bring Lin Ling back to the Flower Burial Valley in the future. Reynolds nodded and felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Hurry to Chong, an academy, and protect Lin Ling. I'm leaving. After saying this, Leah walked out of the room and stepped onto the back of the flower-winged eagle under everyone's respectful gazes. She looked back at Reynolds and urged the flower-winged eagle to fly into the sky. In a few blinks of an eye, she was nowhere to be seen. Leah rode the flower-winged eagle like a fairy flying with the wind. Reynolds watched the flower-winged eagle flap its huge wings and fly higher and higher. He sat on the bed and looked at her back through the window. Then he also walked out of the room. Leah left just like that. It was a shocking sight. She saved his life again and also saved the fate of the entire liner from being destroyed. Fortunately, Lin Ling and Leah got along better than he had expected. Lin Ling must have learned a lot of skills and improved her strength greatly. Although he did not know why she had not replied to him in the past few days, Reynolds was relieved at this moment. He quickly went to Chong, an academy, and met up with Lin Ling at night. The ship had returned to its usual harmony and peace. Wherever Reynolds went, people would be extremely grateful to him, which made Reynolds rather annoyed. In the end, it was all because of that strange daughter of the Sanctuary Guild's president, Irene. If it were not for her, so many people on the ship would not have died. However, Reynolds did not resent her. After all, she had once faced danger with him using the identity of Divine Prime. Most importantly, his right hand had sneakily attacked her chest. It was quite soft. Thinking of this, Reynolds could not help but laugh. He still stood by the railing, looking at the thick night sky and feeling the sea breeze from afar. After a period of sailing at sea, Reynolds was no longer seasick, but there were still some uncomfortable vibrations. A few hours ago, the remnants of the Black Skeleton pirates had lost their backbone. Moreover, Leah was on the Clark at that time, so they had long escaped along the sea route. As for where they went, no one knew. Captain Wang Jinxing also increased the speed of the voyage. It was estimated that they would reach the first capital of the Tang dynasty tomorrow night. Chang'an, One thing that Reynolds was more concerned about was that Irene had disappeared long after Leah arrived. She might have escaped on some underwater magical beast. What a clever little thing, Reynolds muttered to himself. At this moment, Captain Wang Jinxing walked over and said, "Dear Mr. Reynolds, it's time for dinner. Please eat." Reynolds nodded and walked into the cabin. Chapter 407. After experiencing the test of life and death, everyone's faces were filled with joy. Reynolds found a corner and sat down. Soon, someone brought over a large tray. On the tray were barbecued meat, fruit wine, bread, and broccoli. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, please enjoy your meal." The person who delivered the meal was a cute waitress dressed as a bunny girl. She looked at Reynolds with admiration and stars in her eyes. Reynolds said helplessly, "Miss, am I very handsome? Why are you looking at me?" The waitress did not expect Reynolds to talk to her. She quickly nodded and said, "Mr. Reynolds, you are super handsome. Thank you for saving my life." After saying that, she bowed to Reynolds, revealing her deep cleavage. Reynolds almost spat out the food in his mouth. He looked at the girl, waved his hand, and said to her, Okay, I agree. I'll call you if I need anything. I won't be able to eat when a cute girl like you is looking at me." Looking at the girl who walked away, Reynolds shook his head and began to eat. After eating, he went back to his cabin to sleep. When he woke up, he would be in Chang'an. Emergency announcement. Emergency announcement. Miss Irene, the daughter of the president of the Sanctuary Capital Guild, who is known as the Genius Magical Girl, disappeared 3 days ago and has not been seen since. Anyone who knows her whereabouts and provides useful information will receive a generous reward from the Sanctuary Guild of Magic. Emergency announcement. Emergency announcement. Miss Irene, the daughter of the president of the Sanctuary Capital Guild, who is known as the Genius Magical Girl, disappeared 3 days ago and has not been seen since. Anyone who knows her whereabouts and provides useful information will receive a generous reward from the Sanctuary Guild of Magic. The magic mirror in the restaurant broadcasted this news more than 10 times in a row. Reynolds frowned as he listened to the news in the mirror. He was a little concerned. Irene, wasn't she Tian Yuan who faced danger with him a few hours ago? Reynolds took out the map and looked for the location of the sanctuary. At the northernmost end of the map was the sanctuary. The sanctuary was the holy land of the king's realm. There were many headquarters here, such as the General Guild of Magic, the Cathedral, and the world's most famous coin factory. In other words, the basic currencies of this world were crystal coins, gold coins, silver coins, and copper coins. All of them came from the sanctuary. It was no exaggeration to say that the sacred region was the richest place in the world. It seemed like Aaron had a strong background. As for why he suddenly disappeared and ran away from home, or was it because of the marriage between the two families? The affairs of the rich and powerful had nothing to do with Reynolds. In the end, Aaron and Reynolds were just strangers who met by chance. She might never see him again. However, she had said before that she was going to the Chang'an Academy. He might see her there. After finishing his meal, Reynolds returned to his cabin. As the windows were open, the sea breeze blew into the room, making it incomparably cool. Closing the window, Reynolds threw himself onto the bed and let out a long sigh. Chang'an Academy? Here I am. The next day, a long whine of a giant whale woke Reynolds up. The deep-sea giant whale carried the Clark and arrived at Chang'an's pier dawn. Have we arrived? Reynolds' sleepiness was instantly gone. He immediately rushed out of the door and ran to the railing to take a look. In the distance, there was a continuous stretch of houses. The buildings were neatly arranged in picturesque disorder. The densely packed buildings, the people coming and going, as well as the earth dragon carriages that were speeding to and fro. It showed the prosperity and charm of the metropolis. Reynolds followed the crowded passengers down the ship. Looking at the unfamiliar and prosperous city, his heart was filled with emotions. It was really too big. Even the magic city on Earth paled in comparison. Huge magic mirrors could be found everywhere, displaying all kinds of information and advertisements. Reynolds was dazzled. It seemed that no matter which world he was in, it was similar. Emergency announcement. Emergency announcement. The daughter of the president of the Sanctuary Capital Guild, Miss Erin, who is known as the Genius Magical Girl, went missing 3 days ago. No one has seen her until now. Anyone who knows her whereabouts and provides useful information will be rewarded handsomely by the Sanctuary Guild. Renault was sitting on an earthen dragon chariot when he heard the announcement again. The coachman said with a yearning look, "I really don't understand those rich people. They don't want to be the daughter of a noble family. Why do they have to go missing?" Reynolds smiled and said, "Yes, there is something wrong with their heads." Lying in the dormitory of Randolph Academy's martial arts college, Erin's mood was as happy as a bird that was just released from its cage. Finally, she could get rid of those annoying elders in the guild. Apart from her parents, there were a bunch of grandfathers, grandmothers, uncles, aunts, and even old servants. There were dozens of senior members in the guild. They took turns to talk to her almost every day. Erin was so depressed that her endocrine system almost went out of control. Although she had learned a lot from the forced indoctrination and had achieved much more than her peers, a young girl like Erin was in the rebellious period. What she desired more was her own freedom. The guild had almost paved the way for her life, just waiting for her to step on it. Erin felt like she was a puppet at the mercy of others. It was really unbearable. Therefore, when she was about to accept the guild's appointment to marry the son of another big guild, she secretly ran away in the middle of the night. When she thought of the son of the man she was going to marry, oh my God, he was extremely ugly. He was also extremely fat. For some reason, his face was covered with disgusting pimples. A person with endocrine system like this must be extremely wretched. Maybe he would do something disgusting in his room every day. The dean of this academy was a famous warrior in the Empire, Randolph. He had contributed a lot to the Empire during the Demon Seed Rebellion years ago. After that, he spontaneously petitioned the Empire to build an academy to nurture talents who could protect the Empire. In this way, Randolph College had a history of about 50 years. As Randolph grew older, he gradually lost his ability to run the college. Therefore, he specially invited Angela, a powerhouse in the North End Holy Realm, to be the honorary president of the college. However, Randolph was a powerful warrior who only knew how to train hard. His tradition was that only young people would be motivated by competition. In order to maintain a sense of urgency, all the high and low-level dorms had to have at least one or more classmates living with them. This was the reason why Erin was frustrated. She was now a boy. Chapter 408. If they saw Erin's face now, they wouldn't be able to tell that she was the genius which everyone in the Empire was familiar with. It was a man's face. Although it was handsome, no one would doubt her gender. It wasn't so easy to see through a person's disguise. This was a very advanced skill. The Transfiguration user could create a thin film of mana on their face, making them look like another person. This skill that she had secretly trained was the trump card that allowed Irene to escape from the Heavenly Network. She was an extremely intelligent girl. If she were to disguise herself as a boy, no one would think that she was the famous Erin. It was wishful thinking. Unfortunately, Erin didn't take into account two things. The competition in the academy meant that even the best dorms had to be shared by two people. But she was still a girl. It would be inconvenient for her to share a room with a boy. The other thing was that on the Carrigal she was on a few days ago, she was assaulted by a stinking brat called Renault. Don't let this lady see you again. But all in all, Erin was still in a good mood. Freedom was good, the sea was wide, and the sky was wide. The testers were really stupid. All she did was slightly suppress the flow of magic, and they couldn't tell that she was a wizard. The wooden bed she was on was very hard. It couldn't compare to the soft bed at home, but it did give Erin a sense of novelty. She was no longer the high and mighty daughter of the city lord, the little princess loved by everyone in the guild. The life of a commoner was really blissful. If other commoners knew what she was thinking, they would definitely call her a pervert. Asterisk Katja. Asterisk the sound of a key turning came from the bronze lock outside. Erin thought to herself, her roommate. She immediately got up and ran to the living room. Now, Her only hope was that her roommate, who was going to live with her for a long time, was a good-tempered, decent, and well-behaved boy. If that was the case, her life would be better. The door was pushed open. A boy who looked to be about 18 or 19 years old walked in. He wasn't handsome, but he was very pleasing to the eye. He lowered his head and frowned, as if he was thinking about something. He looked very serious and didn't notice Aaron at all. Aaron's mouth opened wide when she saw him. She almost cried out, "My God, it can't be so coincidental." He. Aaron swallowed her saliva and rubbed her eyes. She looked again. The boy was Reynolds. Why is it him? Just a moment ago, she was still wondering if she would be able to see him again. Who would have thought that he would appear in the next moment? Erin suddenly wanted to slap herself. Who told you to have a cheap mouth? Who told you to have a cheap mouth? Fortunately, Erin was proficient in the art of disguise. This time, her appearance wasn't that of Tion Yuan on the Karagal, but a different, delicate face. No one could recognize him. Irene thought for a moment and decided to pretend that she didn't know him to avoid being seen through. Then, she took the initiative to greet him. "Brother, what are you thinking about? Why are you so lost in thought?" Irene's erudition came in handy. She had altered the frequency of her voice with a sound mimicry spell. Although her voice was a little sharp, it was still recognizable as a boy. The boy who was deep in thought raised his head. Contrary to his petrified appearance just now, he said with some emotion, "I'm thinking our academy really has a lot of beauties, especially the last one I saw. That figure, TSK, it's really too lewd." Such a person was naturally Reynolds. After riding the Earth Dragon carriage for 8 hours, they finally arrived at Chong, an academy in the southern part of the city. During the registration, there was no new test like what Lin Ling had said about killing each other. Due to his purifying physique, Reynolds finished the registration very quickly. This made Reynolds feel very strange. He strolled around the academy while asking for news about Lin Ling. Then, Reynolds came to the dormitory. Erin's smile froze on her face. Her jaw almost dropped. She was right, this wretched guy. This bastard who touched her breasts. Nothing good comes out of dog's mouth. But could this be the way men communicate with each other? Reynolds was very pleased to hear her say this. This was how he communicated with his brothers and friends. He had never stayed in a dormitory before on Earth. This was his first time staying here. It seemed that he got along quite well with this brother of his. At least, they were both emotional people. "Brother, you're also in the martial arts class?" Aaron nodded. In fact, as a genius magician, Erin's martial arts skills were also very high. It was just that her amazing magic talent covered it up. Reynolds laughed. "That's great. We're in the same dormitory. It's fate that we met. How should I address you?" "Shijun." This was the name Aaron had made up long ago. "I'm Reynolds." Reynolds also introduced himself briefly, and then looked at her from head to toe. Aaron felt her scalp go numb. Was there a flaw in her flawless disguise? Fortunately, her guess was not correct. Reynolds frowned and said, "Brother Shijun, I say you're too thin. Is losing weight popular here now? When we have time tonight, I'll treat you to a good meal." Aaron's body was originally female, which was also something that could not be changed by disguise. Therefore, she was much slimmer than the average man. Aaron even wore loose clothes, but unexpectedly, it still could not achieve the effect of completely covering her body. She hurriedly nodded. Okay. Thank you." Reynolds waved and smiled. He muttered to himself, "It's a little strange. Your chest muscles are quite developed." He reached out and patted it. Aaron could not accept this no matter what. She hurriedly covered her chest with her hand and dodged to the side. She was secretly annoyed at herself for being so big. Even if she tied it tightly with cloth, it would still bulge. Reynolds scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Sorry, Brother Shijun. I was rude." No matter how rebellious Aaron was, she was still a young girl. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. "You touched me once on the Karagal, and now you dare to do it again? But I can't do anything or my identity will be exposed." It seemed that the interaction between boys wasn't that simple. Reynolds opened the window. There were many new students outside, walking into the academy one after another. Reynolds sighed. This academy is a paradise in another world. Compared to the schools in my world, it's heaven and hell at the same time. Chapter 409. Listening to Reynolds's strange words, Erin wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She had a strong premonition that her nightmare seemed to have started from this moment. Chong, an academy's life, was similar to Reynolds's high school on Earth. On this morning, they gathered at the academy's auditorium and were lectured by the academy's founder, Dean Randolph. Reynolds also met the great hero who protected the Tang dynasty during the Continental War, Dean Randolph. To his disappointment, Randolph didn't shine as brightly as he had imagined. Randolph looked like an ordinary old man. He could smash a bunch of people in the crowd with a brick. Reynolds felt like he was a janitor on Earth. Even those old grandpas who collected garbage were more eye-catching than him. Also, he had a straight face. From the beginning to the end, he didn't show any emotions. He didn't even frown. If he didn't know how to speak, Reynolds would have thought that he was a stone. Dean Randolph's reputation of being rigid and dull was indeed well-deserved. The other freshmen didn't feel anything special about Randolph's speech. Since it was the first time for these newbie fighters to see a peerless powerhouse and their idol, they were extremely excited. Even though Randolph's speech was ordinary, they still applauded loudly. Only Reynolds, who thought that he was bored, yawned. Back on Earth, he had already heard his teacher ramble on endlessly. It was nothing more than studying hard and making progress every day or something like that. Reynolds secretly took out his phone and looked at his WeChat message. He found that Lin Ling still hadn't replied to him. What a headache. What exactly happened? When Reynolds first came to the academy yesterday, he asked around for Lin Ling's whereabouts. He only got some gossip. Lin Ling's class was the demon class in the academy. It was also the first batch of students who were selected for the new test. The so-called new style was a once-in-a-lifetime trial. Killing each other. The winner stayed. The loser was eliminated. Of course, the only thing Reynolds knew was that Lin Ling was safe and sound. Now, he had to find some time to go to the demon class to find Lin Ling. The only regret was that the demon class was too far away from the martial arts class where Reynolds and Shijun were in. Another thing was that Reynolds was interested in the honorary dean of the demon class, Angela. How many heroes had he met? Irene asked. Reynolds, did you not sleep well last night? Since they were all freshmen, she didn't know any of her classmates, so she could only mingle with her roommate, Reynolds. Moreover, she didn't want to come into contact with more people to reduce the possibility of her identity being exposed. Reynolds closed his eyes sleepily and said in a daze, No, I slept very well last night. It's just that the old man was a little boring. Old man? Erin opened her beautiful eyes wide. Even a rebellious girl like her knew that the strong were respected. Her roommate was too arrogant. She glanced around like a thief. Luckily, everyone was attracted by Randolph's speech, and they were sitting in a remote corner of the auditorium. Otherwise, they would be beaten to death by the angry fans. After wiping her sweat, Erin whispered to Reynolds, Reynolds, you'd better call him Dean Randolph. No matter what, he is a powerful warrior of our Tang dynasty. No, even the entire king's realm. We have to respect him. Oh, Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. That old, Dean Randolph, how powerful is he? Compared to the honorary dean, Angela, what level is she at? Erin hurriedly covered Reynolds' mouth when she saw that he was about to say something crazy again. She said hurriedly, How can you say something like that? They are both top warriors. We don't have the chance to see them fight. Reynolds didn't care much about what Erin said. However, when he felt Erin's hand on his mouth, he smelled a faint fragrance. Reynolds frowned and grabbed Erin's hand. He asked curiously, Brother Shijun, why is your hand so fragrant? It's so soft like a girl's. Erin was surprised when Reynolds suddenly grabbed her hand. She blushed and quickly pulled her hand back. She changed the topic. Reynolds, are you bored? Let's talk. Erin's change of topic was very successful. Reynolds only thought Shijun used some perfume, so he didn't pay much attention to it. However, when he heard Erin's words, he was suddenly energized. He said, Okay, let me tell you a few jokes. Unfortunately, he didn't have many friends at this time. When he was on Earth, Reynolds liked to hang out with a few friends, drink a little wine, brag, and tell a few dirty jokes. Aaron thought it was a good idea. Dean Randolph had been talking for almost 2 hours. It wasn't that he was fluent in his speech. On the contrary, he would pause for a few seconds to think of the next sentence before he continued. In other people's eyes, this might be the demeanor of a powerful warrior. However, Erin was a different girl after all. She thought it was a bit boring. Therefore, she clicked with Reynolds' suggestion and wanted to hear what he had to say. My father took me out to take a bath. The floor was slippery, so I grabbed my father's penis and didn't fall down. My father scolded, "Mother of asterisk her. Luckily you came with me. If you came with your mother, you will fall to your death." Reynolds was a quiet but passionate person on Earth. It was just that he had been in the king's realm for a long time, so he didn't have anyone to talk to. Diao Chan can't. She will kill me. Lin Ling can't for the time being. Their relationship hasn't reached that point. Athena, I will die miserably. As for the others, forget it. Now that he had finally made his first real friend of the same sex, he had to say everything he wanted to say. Erin was stunned for a moment. Then she couldn't help but giggle. However, she immediately realized her gaffe and covered her mouth. Her face was red to her ears. Although she looked like a man, she was a girl after all. She still had to have the most basic restraint. Fortunately, under the disguise technique, no one could see any abnormalities. Also, she couldn't help but laugh just now. She forgot to use the sound imitation technique to change her voice. Erin was a bit nervous. Reynolds frowned. Sure, June, why are you laughing like a girl? A real man should laugh cheerfully. For example, ha ha, hee, it's all good, don't giggle, it's too mushy. Reynolds felt his hair stand on end. At the same time, he doubted whether his brother Shurjun was the same. Seeing that he didn't notice, Erin breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, Yes, 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 you are right. Chapter 410. Fortunately, Randolph's long speech was finally over. The students walked out of the auditorium, one after another, and entered the building for their first class. So-called magic is to use one's own magic as a matrix, and gather the elements in the air through the perception of mental strength, making them gather around the matrix's magic as the center. Once it reaches a certain level of strength, it becomes a skill. This was the first class, basic knowledge of magic. Although it was a martial arts class, some basic knowledge of magic still needed to be taught. The lecturer was a lady named Carrie. She was a middle-aged woman who still retained her charm. During the lecture, she would occasionally show off her graceful figure. This caused the hearts of the group of rookie virgin warriors below to ripple. Their attention was more focused on her coquettish gestures. Reynolds listened with great interest. After all, it was his first time teaching in a world like this. The content was very novel and interesting. It seemed that from the beginning, he had simply thought that this was a world related to kings of glory. However, its structure and settings seemed to be slowly expanding, and the new world was becoming clearer and clearer. After living here for a few months, Reynolds was more willing to admit that this was a brand new world that had nothing to do with Kings of Glory. As for Erin, she was a girl after all. Of course, she was unmoved. She carefully analyzed whether Lecturer Carey's lecture was correct or not. Apart from her talent, she liked to ask questions instead of blindly absorbing information. This was one of the reasons why Erin's magic level improved so quickly. This was because this class required a nimble mind to manipulate complex elements. Although Lecturer Carey's lecture was not wrong, Erin still felt that it was not thorough enough. This was inevitable. Erin's sanctuary-level family was originally a family of magic. Her elders were all teaching her without holding anything back. Naturally, she was much better than an ordinary lecturer. However, Erin did not have much contact with the outside world and did not understand this. She only felt that Lecturer Carey's lecture was not very good, so she wanted to ask for others' opinions. Of course, since she only knew one person since she came to the academy, she could only ask for help from her roommate, Reynolds, who was listening to the lecture with great interest. But his gaze seemed to be the same as those rookie virgin warriors. Most of them were looking at certain parts of Miss Carey's body. Aaron poked Reynolds' waist. Reynolds turned around and whispered, "What's wrong, Shi-Jun? We have to pay attention in class. Do you want to hear a joke?" "Not now." Irene thought to herself. "How are you listening to the lecture? You're clearly fantasizing about the teacher." However, he still said, "Reynolds, we also need to discuss problems occasionally in class to increase our activity. By the way, what do you think of Ms. Carey?" Reynolds clicked his tongue and rubbed his chin. He pondered for a while and said, "She's quite coquettish. I wonder if she'll have an affair behind her husband's back. If she was on Earth, she would probably look like a celebrity with the surname Yang." Aaron almost fainted. "What I mean is, how was her lecture? What are you thinking?" "Reynolds, we can't be so disrespectful to our teacher." She felt that her roommate's thoughts were too imaginative. Could it be that all boys were like this? Terrifying. "Oh, you're talking about that. Make it clear." Reynolds didn't realize his mistake and instead made a false accusation. Aaron almost couldn't catch her breath. "Brother, other than you, who else would understand other things?" Reynolds said casually, It's just that the content of the lecture is a little novel. Speaking of which, her figure and skin are quite well maintained. It's quite rare for someone her age." Seeing that he returned to the topic after a few sentences, Aaron simply shut her mouth. It was very difficult to communicate with a man and with Reynolds. Renaud glanced at Irene, and a smile appeared on his face. It's so good to learn and become stronger in such a world. After coming to this world for a few months, Reynolds felt as if he was a person of this world. He was actually slowly accepting this place. A few days later, Reynolds had a preliminary understanding of the Chang'an Academy. Most of the professions in the Tang Empire had been opened: warrior, magic master, assassin, thief, archer, followed by hunter, assistant, priest, summoner, boundary master. Generally speaking, they were classified according to physics and magic. Reynolds studied physics, while Lin Ling studied magic. This was only the news that Reynolds had heard. Before he saw Lin Ling in person, Reynolds' heart would never be at ease. The distance between the Martial Arts Academy and the Magic Academy was really far. If he took the Earth Dragon Chariot, it would take about half an hour to get there. That showed how big Chang'an Academy was. Carefully divided, there were usually dozens of classes for majors, and each class had about dozens of students. Classes for minor majors had fewer students, maybe a dozen or a few. All in all, the Chang'an Academy had an amazing number of students, nearly 20,000. Every year, they sent so many talents to the Tang Empire, so their status in the whole society of the Tang Empire was very high. People of the royal family and the nobles had to respect these lecturers and didn't dare to be arrogant. The academy had strict requirements. Classes started at 7 o'clock in the morning, took an hour's rest at noon, and then continued until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But Reynolds felt that these classes were much more relaxed than his high school. It was almost the same as the university he went to. It was just that the classes he had been attending these past few days were all about basic theories. What Reynolds wanted to hear was the history of Great Tang, the history of the continent, and even the swords and sabers that he had imagined training in the training grounds. He didn't get to hear or practice them at all. Therefore, he felt a little bored and started to take a nap during the classes. And this basic theory class would last for 2 weeks. Many people's understanding of a warrior is only limited to their thick muscles and tyrannical strength. But in fact, a warrior is not a magical beast that only knows how to attack. No matter how strong our muscles are, they can't resist the teeth and claws of magical beasts. Even if our defensive power is high, we will be at a disadvantage if we fight them head-on. Therefore, we have to learn how to dodge, block, and other defensive skills. Now, I'll talk about the specific content of defense. Although Carter was a powerful warrior and an experienced lecturer, his lecture was not lively at all. Perhaps all the lecturers in the academy were influenced by Dean Randolph's dull-witted personality. Dean Randolph's lecture was not interesting at all. Chapter 411. However, there was no doubt that he was a selfless lecturer. He would try his best to answer every question that came his way. Therefore, none of the students would miss this opportunity. They were all very serious in class. It was a pity that Reynolds, who found this theory boring, was still drowsy. It was just a theory. He could just listen to it casually. There was no need to digest this boring knowledge. Therefore, it didn't take long for him to fall asleep on the table. Feeling a bone-chilling cold on his head, Reynolds, who had dreamed of some strange things, woke up with a start. He raised his head with a blank expression and was about to ask something. Suddenly, he remembered that he was in a classroom in Tang Dynasty's Chong, an academy. It was a familiar scene. However, the blackboard had been replaced by a magic mirror, and the chalk had been replaced by an ice ball. The lecturer, Carter, was standing on the podium. He was so angry that his beard was blowing and his eyes were glaring. His palm was still open, and his palm was facing Reynolds. Naturally, he was the one who threw the ice ball. Irene looked helpless. She had already poked Reynolds's waist several times when she saw that the situation was not good. This was Irene's weakness. She would laugh if she used any force. However, it was useless on Reynolds. Carter's face was gloomy. "Student, is my lecture that boring?" Reynolds hurriedly said, "Not at all, Mr. Carter. Your lecture is lively, witty, and humorous. My respect for you is like a surging river. It's endless. It's also like—" Carter interrupted him. "Very good. Go to the warrior training field at the back of the mountain and chop the trial stone 1,000 times. Come back when you have enough data." Reynolds walked out of the classroom in embarrassment. He couldn't help but feel that it was funny and unbelievable. He didn't expect that no matter which school he was in, the teachers were all the same. The Stone of Trials was a type of stone used by warriors and assassins who used heavy or light weapons to practice basic movements such as hacking, chopping, knocking, and stabbing to increase their strength. It was not accurate to call it a stone because it was not as hard as normal stones. Instead, it was flexible like cow tendons. In fact, it was a special kind of plant. When damaged by external forces, it could absorb the particles in the air and recover at an amazing speed. It was a pity that there wasn't a lot of it, otherwise it would definitely be the best material for the city walls. However, the production of trial stones was enough to become the training tools of the academy. Moreover, they were of the best quality. If they were really hard and big stones, after a few slashes, the recoil would split the skin between the thumb and the index finger. Inferior weapons would even be greatly damaged, making it difficult to achieve the effect of high-frequency training. Another benefit of the Stone of Trials was that the feeling of the weapons clashing against it was similar to that of many magical beasts and humans. This would allow the martial artist to be fully mentally prepared when they set foot on the battlefield in the future. However, even if it was a flexible object, it was not an easy task to cut it thousands of times. Furthermore, he could not be lazy. This was because the Academy's trial stone had a built-in recording device. If he cut the stone, the data would be recorded. However, when his strength reached a certain level, the number of cuts recorded would increase. It was not something that could be done just by fooling around. All records would be automatically cleared after the tester took out the data sheet, leaving it for future testers to continue practicing. In addition, during the practice period, the frequency of every 10 minutes could not be lower than a certain value. Otherwise, the data would also be cleared, and it would not be possible to divide the time to complete it. The cultivation of perseverance and willpower required a spurt of energy. This was especially true when magical beasts attacked cities or when foreign countries were in conflict. Occupations such as warriors and knights had to stand at the forefront to resist the tide of magical beasts and armies. Sometimes it was simply impossible to stop and take a breather. The academy often used the trial stones to arrange training tasks for the students. There was no need for the instructors to personally supervise them. Instead, the students themselves had to hand in the data sheet. Generally speaking, it was a rare opportunity to study in the academy. Almost everyone would work hard and never be lazy. They would strive to absorb as much knowledge as possible before graduation and embark on the path of the strong. The trial stones were usually used during the practical class, but today was an exception. This was because the academy was currently only at the theory class stage for freshmen. However, there was one more person in the freshman's trial field. This was a large field with an area of 3,000 square meters, but there was only one person because it was class time. A few days later, Reynolds had a preliminary understanding of the Chong, an academy. Most of the professions in the Tang Empire had been opened: warrior, magic master, assassin, thief, archer, followed by hunter, assistant, priest, summoner, boundary master. Generally speaking, they were classified according to physics and magic. Reynolds studied physics, while Lin Ling studied magic. This was just the information Reynolds had heard. Before he saw Lin Ling in person, Reynolds would not be relieved. The distance between the martial arts class and the magic class was really far. If one took the Earth Dragon carriage, it would take about half an hour to drive there. This showed how large the Chong and Academy was. In detail, there were usually dozens of classes for majors, and each class had about a dozen students. Classes for minor majors had fewer students, and it was possible to have a dozen or even a few students. All in all, the Chong and Academy had an astonishing number of students, nearly 20,000. Every year, they sent so many talents to the Tang Empire, so their status in the whole society of the Tang Empire was very high. People of the royal family and the nobles had to respect these lecturers and did not dare to be arrogant. The requirements of the academy were very strict. Classes started at 7 in the morning, took an hour's rest at noon, and then continued until about 4 in the afternoon. However, Reynolds felt that these classes were much more relaxed than his high school. It was similar to the university he attended. It was just that the classes he had been attending these past few days were all about basic theories. What Reynolds wanted to hear was the history of Great Tang, the history of the continent, and even the swords and sabers that he had imagined training in the training grounds. He didn't get to hear or practice them at all. Therefore, he inevitably felt a little bored and began to selectively doze off in class. And these basic theory classes would last for 2 weeks. Many people's understanding of warriors stops at their thick muscles and tyrannical strength. But in fact, warriors are not magic beasts who only know how to attack. No matter how strong our muscles are, it is difficult to resist the teeth and claws of magic beasts. Even if our defensive power is high, we will be at a disadvantage if we fight head-on. Therefore, we must learn how to dodge, block, and other defensive skills. Now, I will talk about the specific content of defense. Chapter 412. Although Carter was a powerful warrior and an experienced lecturer, his lecture was not lively at all. Perhaps all the lecturers in the academy were influenced by Dean Randolph's dull-witted personality. Dean Randolph's lecture was not interesting at all. Perhaps all the lecturers in the academy were influenced by Dean Randolph. However, there was no doubt that he was a selfless lecturer. He would try his best to answer every question from the academy. Therefore, none of the students would miss this opportunity. They were all very serious in the class. Reynolds, who found the theory boring, was still sleepy. It was just a theory, and there was no need for him to digest this boring knowledge. Therefore, it didn't take long for him to fall asleep on the table, feeling a bone-chilling cold on his head. Reynolds, who had dreamed of some strange things, woke up with a start. He raised his head with a blank expression and was about to ask something. Suddenly, he remembered that he was in a classroom in Chong, an academy in Tang Dynasty. It was a familiar scene. However, the blackboard was replaced by a magic mirror, and the chalk was replaced by an ice ball. Carter was standing on the podium. He was so angry that he was glaring at Reynolds. His hand was still open, and his palm was facing Reynolds. Obviously, he was the one who threw the ice ball. Erin's face was full of helplessness. She had already poked Reynolds' waist several times when she saw that the situation wasn't good. Aline's waist was a vital part of her body, and she would burst out laughing if she used any force. However, it did not work on Reynolds. Carter's face darkened. "Excuse me, is my lecture that boring?" Reynolds hurriedly said, "You're too kind, Mr. Carter. Your narration is lively, witty, and humorous. My respect for you is like a surging river, endless and unending. It's also like Carter interrupted him and said, very well. Now, go to the warrior training field in the back of the mountain and chop the trial stone 1,000 times. Come back when you have enough data. Reynolds walked out of the classroom embarrassedly. He could not help but feel that it was funny and unbelievable. No matter which school he was in, the teachers were all the same. The Stone of Trials was a type of stone used by warriors and assassins who used heavy or light weapons to practice basic movements such as hacking, chopping, knocking, and stabbing to increase their strength. It wasn't accurate to call it a stone because it wasn't as hard as ordinary stones. Instead, it was flexible just like cow tendons. In fact, it was a kind of strange plant. When it was injured by external forces, it could recover at an astonishing speed by absorbing particles in the air. It was a pity that there wasn't a lot of it, otherwise it would definitely be the best material for the city walls. However, the production of trial stones was enough to become the training tools of the academy. Moreover, they were the best quality. If they were really hard and big stones, after a few slashes, the recoil would split the skin between the thumb and the index finger. Inferior weapons would even be greatly damaged, making it difficult to achieve the effect of high-frequency training. Another benefit of the Stone of Trials was that the feeling of the weapons clashing against it was similar to that of many magical beasts and humans. This would allow the martial artists to be fully mentally prepared when they set foot on the battlefield in the future. However, even if it was a flexible object, it was not an easy task to cut it thousands of times. Furthermore, he could not be lazy. This was because the Academy's trial stone had a built-in recording device. If he cut the stone, the data would be recorded. However, when his strength reached a certain level, the number of cuts recorded would increase. It was not something that could be done just by fooling around, and all the records would be automatically cleared after the tester took out the data sheet, leaving it for future testers to continue practicing. Also, during the practice period, the frequency of every 10 minutes could not be lower than a certain value. Otherwise, it would also be cleared, and it would not be possible to split the time to complete it. The cultivation of perseverance and willpower required a spurt of energy. This was especially true when magical beasts were attacking cities or when foreign countries were in conflict. Warriors, knights, and other occupations had to stand at the forefront, resisting the tide of magical beasts and armies. Sometimes, it was simply impossible to stop and take a breather. The Academy often used the trial stones to arrange the training tasks for the students. There was no need for the instructors to personally supervise them. Instead, the students themselves had to hand in the data sheet. Generally speaking, it was a rare and good opportunity to be able to study in the Academy. Almost everyone would work hard and would not be lazy. They would strive to absorb as much knowledge as possible before graduation and stride towards the path of the strong. The trial stones were usually only used during the practical class, but today was an exception. This was because the Academy was currently only at the theory class stage for the freshmen. However, there was one more person in the freshmen's trial field. In a large field with an area of 3,000 square meters, there was only one person. This was because it was class time. Reynolds panted as he held the special training knife for the trial field. He slashed at the trial stone in front of him again and again. 805,806,807,808. Reynolds listened to the value transmitted from the recording device and wiped his sweat. His arm was completely numb, and even lifting it was a bit of a problem. He was still a little short of the 1,000 that the old fellow Carter had requested. In fact, the freshman's task was usually around 500. However, Carter's requirements were strict, and he was a little harsh on this freshman who dared to sleep in his class. At the same time, it served as an example to others. Reynolds used all his strength to slash at the stone, but he could only cut it as deep as a thumb. Then, the trial stone would return to normal soon after. This made Reynolds feel very defeated. Finally, he could not help but sit on the ground. However, his butt had not even warmed up yet. Beep, 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 beep. The recording device in the trial stone issued a warning. reminding the tester that the frequency of 10 minutes was too low. If he did not work hard, he might not be able to meet the requirements. Instead, he would be forcefully cleared, and all his previous efforts would be wasted. Reynolds helplessly picked up the large knife prepared by the trial field. He imagined the trial stone to be Carter's hateful face that had embarrassed him. His strength grew again, and he used all his strength to slash at the stone. It was not because Reynolds' physical strength was too weak, but because Reynolds had never intended to use Levi's strength to carry out the trial. After having a taste of using his ordinary strength to slash at the trial stone, Reynolds felt that his whole body was about to fall apart. Fortunately, Reynolds discovered that he did not know why, but after coming to the king's realm, his physique seemed to have become better and better. For example, this punishment of 1,000 slashes. If it was in the past, he might not even be able to finish 100 slashes before his physical strength was overdrawn. Huff, huff. When Reynolds held the value of 1,000, he was so tired that he directly laid down on the trial field. His whole body seemed to have fallen apart, and he did not want to get up. He just wanted to sleep like this. So tired, Reynolds let out a loud roar as if he was venting. He took out a bottle of ice-cold bustling from his apocalypse bracelet and drank it all in one go. Drinking happy water after exercising was really too refreshing. Chapter 413. Soon it was the weekend. Reynolds wanted to have a meal with June, but she said she wasn't feeling well and went back to her dorm. Reynolds had no choice but to give up. He told her he was going out to meet a friend and asked her to leave the door open. The two parted ways, and June returned to her dorm. June entered the bathroom. Even though it was the weekend, she had nowhere to go. She didn't have a home in Chang, and so she could only stay in the academy. The reflection of a young girl's beautiful face appeared on the glass. That was her true appearance. Young girls always like to look good, especially those who had absolute confidence in themselves. After a week of using the disguise technique, Aaron couldn't help but remove it. It was such a beautiful face that even Aaron was intoxicated with it. However, it had to be hidden under an elemental membrane during her most youthful years. Aaron couldn't help but feel a little regretful when she thought about it. She took off her commoner's clothes one by one, and her jade-white body was exposed like a peeled corn. She had never done any heavy work since she was young, and her skin was as tender as the princess in Andersen's fairy tale, who could feel the hardness of a pea through 20 layers of quilts and 20 layers of feather cushions. A layer of white cloth wrapped tightly around the girl's proudest part. Aaron gently pulled the knot on her back, and the white cloth fell to the ground. A pair of white rabbits that would make most women feel ashamed of their inferiority jumped out. They were especially active after being suppressed for a long time, but they could only see the light of day for a short period of time. Aaron looked at her beautiful body in the water mirror and sighed. She had gained freedom after escaping her family, but she had to pay a price for it. For the next few years, she had to hide her beauty and live as a man. Aaron suddenly had the urge to dress up as a woman again to satisfy her cravings. Reynolds was not around. He said that he would only be back at night, but he might not be back. Aaron didn't even put on her clothes. She walked out naked to get her clothes. Just as she reached the living room, the sound of a key turning came from outside the door. Aaron was shocked. She turned around and ran back to the bathroom. Just as she was about to lock the door, Reynolds rushed in and pushed the door open. Wait, wait. Ah, Irene screamed. Mariana. She turned around and yelled at the same time. The magic lamp went out. Taking advantage of the darkness, Irene hurriedly ran to the side of the bathtub and jumped in with a plop. Her heart was thumping nonstop. Did he see her real face and female body just now? Also, why did he suddenly barge in? Could it be that he saw that she was a woman and wanted to take advantage of her? Thinking of this, Irene secretly gathered her magic power. If Reynolds tried to violate her, she would not hesitate to beat him until he was incapacitated. Brother Shijun, why did you turn off the lights? Just as Reynolds was about to say the spell to turn on the light, Irene interrupted him in a panic. Don't turn on the light. She was relieved that her roommate hadn't discovered her secret. Reynolds was taken aback. Why? It's so dark, I can't see anything. Erin didn't answer. Instead, she asked, W, why did you suddenly come back? Reynolds touched his forehead helplessly and said, I haven't showered for almost a week. I've been training my body every day, and I'm covered in sweat. I'm going to find a friend later. What if she sees me smelly? Moreover, Reynolds didn't think there was anything wrong with taking a bath with a boy. After all, he was on Earth. He could take a bath with a few of his roommates. It was very satisfying. Irene was still in shock. I'll be done soon. Can't you wait? Reynolds explained. I have to go see my friend quickly. It's very important. Moreover, we're all men. What's wrong with taking a bath together? Don't tell me. Irene's heart tightened. This guy was finally suspicious. What should she do now? Reynolds suddenly gave a meaningful laugh and said, Brother, don't tell me it's because it's relatively small? Afraid I'll see it? Haha. Shijun, don't worry. I won't use this to mock others. You know, it's not scary if it's small. There's plenty of room for growth in the future. The most important thing for us men is endurance. We can endure for a long time. Well, that's what I mean. Seeing that his words were getting dirtier, Reynolds finally shut his mouth in embarrassment. He had to restrain himself a little. Although he hadn't said anything flirtatious since he came to King's Realm, suddenly being so fierce was not what Reynolds wanted. After all, Irene was a girl. She didn't know how to answer such vulgar talk about a man's ugly thing. She was so shy that she wanted to dive into the water. But hearing the sound of clothes falling on the floor, Irene knew that tonight's bath was inevitable. She could only helplessly say, Okay, Reynolds, but you can't turn on the light. I'm not used to taking a bath with others. Reynolds smiled and said, Shijun, you're really strange. You even have a hobby of turning off the light. Okay, I'll do as you say. I've always been indifferent. Irene thought, You're the one with a hobby. You want to barge in when I'm taking a bath. Wouldn't a coward be scared to death by you? When he thought of washing away the dirt on his body and going to see Lin Ling with a refreshed spirit, and then they could talk about their parting, Reynolds had a smile on his face all the time. Thinking of this, Reynolds said to Irene, I'm coming. He ran a few steps and then fell into the bath with a plop. Although it was the Academy's dormitory, it was still a fighter's dormitory, so it was very big. It was much bigger than an ordinary family's dormitory, but Irene still thought it was small. Hearing the sound of Reynolds splashing water beside her, her heart was uneasy. Her hands tightly covered the female's important parts, one above and one below, for fear that he would stretch his evil claws over. She had never thought that she would actually be in the same bath with a man she had only known for less than a week. Although it was an accident, she was still so shy that her face was burning and her ears were red. Fortunately, Reynolds was really just taking a bath and didn't become restless. This made Irene breathe a sigh of relief. However, Reynolds suddenly felt that it would be more or less awkward if the two of them took a bath without saying a word. So, Reynolds said to Irene, Shijun, let's talk. Irene was surprised and said, Okay, what do you want to talk about? Reynolds thought for a moment and asked, Do you know about the Academy's new policy? New policy? I've heard about it. Irene asked curiously. But as expected of someone from a big family, she was very well informed. This year's dean came up with a new policy in order to select talents different from the previous years. It's said that it's to cultivate talents for future wars, so the first batch of freshmen will kill each other. The winner will receive a great privilege from the Academy. Chapter 414. Huh? What about the losers? Did they really kill each other? Did anyone die? Aaron frowned. I'm not sure. It said that there were only 20 or so winners a while ago. They were assigned to a special class by the Chong and Academy. It's a class that the Academy is focusing on. Reynolds nodded. There was no news about Lin Ling. Could it be? But it was impossible. Lin Ling and Jiao Chan were so close. She must have given Lin Ling a lot of magic treasures. Reynolds relaxed a little. He looked at Aaron in the dark with admiration. Shijun, you're amazing. I feel like you're very well informed and knowledgeable. This was what Aaron was best at. She said proudly, Of course. Look at me, who am I? Erin almost spilled the beans. She looked at Reynolds in horror. Fortunately, Reynolds didn't hear anything. He was still bathing. Shijun, why aren't you bathing? I heard you standing there the whole time. Erin heard Reynolds' voice and thought of his naked body not far from her. She was shocked and embarrassed. I'm bathing. She cupped her hands and splashed water on her body, pretending to be bathing. Reynolds smiled. Shijun, take your time. I'll go out first. Erin was relieved. She got up and wanted to lock the bathroom door. Halfway through, the door was suddenly pushed open. For the second time, Erin screamed in fright and covered her private parts. Fortunately, the lights were off and the bathroom was pitch black. Otherwise, everything would have been exposed if they faced each other face to face. Erin was like a woman facing rape. Reynolds, what do you want? She asked in a trembling voice. Reynolds chuckled and said, Shijun, do you know? I just found out a secret of yours. Her roommate's tone was so strange that Erin felt dizzy. Oh no, he knew I was a woman. He just didn't expose me. Reynolds let out a strange laugh and said, Shijun, when I came in to take a shower, I accidentally saw your butt. No, your butt. It's really white, round, and perky. It's almost like a girl's. No wonder you didn't dare to take a shower with me with the lights on. You were afraid that I would make fun of you, right? Don't worry, I'm a very kind person. Ha! He slammed the door. Erin was on the verge of tears. Apart from her parents, no other man had ever seen her body, and it was even that part. Erin felt as if her world had crumbled. The purest land in her heart had been tainted. The terrible premonition she had when she first met her roommate had unfortunately come true. At this moment, the bathroom door was pushed open for the third time. Erin was completely numb from the shock that was even more exciting than bungee jumping. Even if her roommates pounced on her, she probably wouldn't be bothered to resist since she was so disheartened. However, Reynolds didn't know she was a woman. Even if he did, he wouldn't do such a thing. This time, he had something important to talk to her about. Shijun, I almost forgot. You're not a local, right? It's too lonely to be alone at school. Do you want to come to Chang'an with me this weekend? When Reynolds was getting impatient, Erin used a disguise spell to change back to Shijun. She put on her clothes and walked out of the bathroom. That set of women's clothing, which was the only set of women's clothing she had left behind, had been thrown back into the magic storage ring. Although it would add a little weight, it was better than leaving it in the bag, which might cause accidents in the future. When Erin came out, Reynolds grabbed her arm and said, Why are you so slow, Shijun? I'm almost weathered. Erin gently shook off his hand. Her face was as red as the sunset. Half of it was because she was shy, and the other half was because she was aroused by her own imagination. Reynolds, I have a few requests. Reynolds was stunned. What requests are they? That's so serious. Is it because I can't make fun of you? I didn't mean that. Erin felt helpless when talking to an alien again. It's not like that. First, you can't barge in when I'm bathing. Reynolds said, That's it? That's easy. Do you feel like you're at a disadvantage when I see you like that? How about this? Next time when you're bathing, I'll show you mine too. Erin blushed. I don't want that. Anyway, I like to bathe alone. It's a matter of personal preference. You have to respect my privacy. Reynolds nodded. Okay. I want to use this method to improve our friendship. What other requests do you have? Erin said, Second, you're not allowed to touch my body. Two grown men, it's too mushy, Reynolds smiled. Okay. As long as you don't want me to give myself to you, everything else is negotiable. Let's talk while we walk. He then grabbed her arm and walked away. Shijun, this doesn't count as touching, right? I can't wait any longer. Let's hurry up. Erin wanted to break free, but after hearing Reynolds' last sentence, she felt embarrassed and could only let him hold her arm. However, her body was a little stiff. She had never held hands with a man before, but on second thought, since they had already bathed together, holding hands was not a big deal. Anyway, he did not know that she was a woman. Erin sighed and followed Reynolds out of the door. As soon as he reached the gate, Reynolds called for a small Earth Dragon car and went straight to the Magic Academy in Chang'an. Although the martial arts and magic academies were both in Chang'an, and they were very far away. It took almost an hour to walk, but with the Earth Dragon speed, They arrived at their destination in a short while. Erin looked at the excited Reynolds and couldn't help but sigh. She originally wanted to spend a leisurely weekend alone, take a good bath, and admire her beautiful and moving body, but she didn't want to be completely ruined by this bastard Reynolds. It was boring to stay in the dorm alone. She might as well go with Reynolds. Erin looked at Reynolds and asked, "Reynolds, is that friend of yours in the Magic Academy a girl?" Reynolds faintly smiled and said, "Yes, I hope to see her. She seems to be one of the first batch of students who were used as guinea pigs by the Academy." Erin was a little surprised and curious about Reynolds' background, but because they weren't familiar with each other, she couldn't ask. Reynolds took out 2 hermit cloaks from his pocket and handed one to Erin. Chapter 415. Erin asked curiously, "Why are you wearing this? Are we going to rob someone?" Although she hadn't stayed with Reynolds for a long time, under the influence of what she had heard and seen, she would more or less be influenced by some wild and unconstrained thoughts. While Erin was feeling proud of her words, Reynolds looked at her with admiration. "Not bad, little Shurjun. You're much more humorous now. You're not as rigid as you were a few days ago. But you're wrong. Don't you think that we're so handsome that we'll attract a lot of people's attention? What if we get entangled with a group of passionate beauties when we enter the academy? Sigh, there's no other way. We're so handsome, there's really no other way." Then he sighed. Erin was dumbfounded as she looked at the shameless Reynolds. She was speechless for a while. The little bit of pride that had just risen disappeared in an instant. It seemed that between her and this weird roommate, no matter how much she improved, she felt that she couldn't catch up to him. Reynolds had found this cloak by chance in the Apocalypse bracelet. After discovering its wonderful use, he immediately fell in love with it. In fact, Reynolds had a reason for wearing the hermit cloak that even he felt was a little too cautious. Recently, he had always felt that there was a strange gaze watching him. He had tried to search for it, but it would always disappear when he was about to catch it. This made Reynolds very frightened and angry, as if his private life was being peeped at. Sometimes Reynolds felt that he was being too cautious, but that strange feeling still told him that he was being watched. Reynolds was very unhappy with this feeling. For the sake of caution, Reynolds chose to wear the hermit cloak in broad daylight. The two arrived at the Demon Path class not far away and quietly waited here, watching the students coming in and out. After a while, Reynolds' eyes lit up, and he walked quickly to a flower bed in front of him. Erin sighed and could only follow. Reynolds quickened his pace. He saw a familiar figure, the figure that he had been thinking about day and night, the figure of his only relative in the king's realm. Lin Ling. Reynolds wanted to hug her fiercely. He really wanted to hug her. It felt like a lifetime ago. Reynolds was halfway there when he suddenly stopped. His eyes turned cold. He paused for a moment before continuing to walk forward. Lin Ling was still as beautiful as ever. Her temperament had become more mature and calm. She was followed closely by a man. This man was dressed in a knight's armor. He was tall and powerful, had a head of golden hair, and was incomparably handsome. However, upon closer inspection, one could see the distressed expression on Lin Ling's face. Reynolds walked forward and stood in front of Lin Ling, looking at the strange man. When the strange male knight saw that someone had interrupted them, he immediately became angry. He frowned and asked coldly, "Who are you?" As Reynolds was wearing the hermit's cloak, even Lin Ling did not recognize him. "You don't have the qualifications to know who I am," said Reynolds coldly. "I'll count to 3 and you'll immediately scram out of my sight. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that you can still stand here in one piece." Reynolds' words could be said to be a provocation, but there was no other way. Reynolds felt that if he could not see Lin Ling, the only person who had gone through thick and thin with him, he would miss her at most. But now, Reynolds really saw a living person instead of chatting on WeChat. Reynolds really could not stand Lin Ling being pestered by another man. In other words, Reynolds was in a daze. He had completely lost his usual tranquility and calmness. Sure enough, when the strange man heard this, a feminine expression appeared on his face. He smiled and said somewhat playfully, You're talking nonsense. I like to see what you can do to me. 1. It turned out that Reynolds had already started counting. Behind him, Lin Ling frowned and looked at Reynolds, but did not say anything. 2. Reynolds said the second number. At this time, his roommate, Aaron, tugged at the corner of Reynolds's clothes and whispered, "Hey, you're causing trouble." How could she not know Reynolds's strength? He was only slightly better than an ordinary person. The person in front of her was obviously a very high-level knight. Although she did not take him seriously, the difference in strength was too big for Reynolds. Reynolds was unmoved and said the last number expressionlessly. 3. The strange knight looked at Reynolds with a playful expression and sneered, "Time's up. What do you do to me?" Reynolds sighed and looked at the strange knight's handsome face in front of him. He said, "You asked for it." The strange knight laughed. "Haha, interesting. What are you going to do to me?" Aaron tugged at Reynolds's clothes and whispered, "Reynolds, don't cause trouble. You can't beat him." Reynolds raised his wrist and pointed the apocalypse bracelet at him. The strange knight was stunned and laughed. "Huh? What do you mean? Are you doing acrobatics?" Reynolds's angry and jealous face gradually calmed down. He stared at him for a while and put the bracelet away. After all, opening the underworld in such a shocking manner was too ostentatious. There was a rumbling sound, the sky darkened, and a bolt of lightning fell from the sky like a bolt of lightning, mercilessly striking the unfamiliar knight. Aaron, Lin Ling, and everyone else around them were shocked by the sudden turn of events. They all turned to look at the two of them. "What's going on? Someone activated an innate skill on campus? Huh, are the freshmen this year so arrogant? Interesting." The strange knight's attention was completely attracted by Reynolds' action of raising his wrist and did not notice the thunder of punishment. At this moment, he was struck by lightning. His skin was char-black, and his smooth golden hair was completely blown up. His armor was also smashed to the ground, and smoke was coming out of it. Boom! The unfamiliar knight was caught off guard and fainted just like that. He fell to the ground. Aaron looked at Reynolds with her mouth agape. She said, "Reynolds, you're in trouble now." Lin Ling looked at Reynolds and frowned. She suddenly thought of something, and the calm expression on her face suddenly became agitated. "Chun, Reynolds, you're here." Reynolds smiled. Although he was wearing the hermit's cloak, Lin Ling could not see it. Reynolds said, "Let's go to a deserted place." Lin Ling did not say anything else and quickly left with Reynolds and Aaron. Chong, an academy, training field. There were only 3 people in the huge training field. Chapter 416. Reynolds took off his hermit cloak and looked at Lin Ling, looking at her increasingly mature and beautiful appearance. Her delicate face was extremely cute. However, because they hadn't seen each other for a long time, her eyes were also filled with tears. She didn't expect to see Reynolds again. "Reynolds, you bad guy!" Lin Ling cried and threw herself into Reynolds' arms. Reynolds was also filled with emotions. His first meeting with Lin Ling was like a movie in Reynolds' mind. "Wow, you're amazing. Can you take me as your disciple?" Sob, sob, sob. "Why do we die again, QAQ?" Reynolds, "Then we must survive." Reynolds, "You shy little boy, huh?" The first time they met, the first time they sat together, the first time they held hands, the first time they hugged, the first time they took risks, the first time they faced death, the first time they survived a disaster. Even first love. Reynolds had given her all the firsts. He thought they would never meet again. Reynolds even thought that without Diao Chan's protection, he would definitely die in a foreign land. Now that they met again, he saw a living person again. Reynolds opened his arms and was ready to welcome Lin Ling into his embrace. Slap! A loud slap was heard, and a red palm print immediately appeared on Reynolds' left cheek. Reynolds looked at Lin Ling in shock. He touched his face and felt a burning pain. Lin Ling didn't jump into his arms as he had imagined. Instead, she gave him a big slap on the face. Lin Ling snorted and stood in front of Reynolds. She said coldly, "Who told you to leave a few months ago? Didn't we agree to share weal and woe together?" Before Reynolds could speak, Aaron was a little embarrassed. She pointed at both parties and said, Should I leave for a while? Seeing Reynolds's helpless expression, Aaron gave him a sympathetic look and left immediately. Only Reynolds and Lin Ling were left in the training field. Lin Ling's expression was cold, and her eyes were full of resentment as she looked at Reynolds. Reynolds looked at Lin Ling and her haggard face. He felt pity for her. Without saying anything, he strode forward and stretched out his arms to hug Lin Ling. Reynolds, what are you doing? Lin Ling pushed Reynolds away symbolically. She punched Reynolds' shoulder with her little fist and said angrily, "Let go. Otherwise, I'll get angry." Reynolds hugged her and felt her soft body. He seemed to sense her uneasiness, her fear, and a trace of helplessness. "It's all my fault. Linger, it's all my fault." Reynolds closed his eyes and murmured. Only at this moment did he finally experience this inexplicable uneasiness and helplessness. He was Lin Ling's only family in this strange world. Yet, he had just thrown her down alone. "I swear, in my whole life, I will never throw you aside. I swear that I will protect you. I will do my best to protect you. I swear that the two of us will definitely return to Earth." Reynolds couldn't hold it in any longer and poured out all his true feelings. He was afraid that he would never have such an opportunity again. Lin Ling hadn't expected Reynolds to say something like that. She stopped struggling and allowed Reynolds to hug her. She looked at Reynolds with a much gentler expression. "Are you serious?" Lin Ling rubbed her red eyes, her face full of confusion. Reynolds hugged Lin Ling tightly, looked at her, and said firmly, "It's true. I will definitely bring you back to Earth." Lin Ling punched Reynolds and said, "Who told you to say this? What else did you say just now?" Reynolds bared his teeth and let go of Lin Ling. He smiled bitterly and said, "Linger, your punches are really powerful." Lin Ling smiled and looked at Reynolds. She raised her fist and threatened, "Humph, now you know how powerful I am. If you dare to leave me behind in the future, I will." "No, don't change the topic." Reynolds smiled evilly and said, "Accompany you, protect you, and spend the rest of my life with you. Then, when we return to Earth, I will propose to you." Little Ling, you want me to say this, right? Nothing good comes out of dog's mouth. Go away. Lin Ling's face was slightly red, and she punched him. "Look at you. We haven't seen each other for a few months. Why are you so jealous? Knight Leon is just a classmate of mine. You, on the other hand, knocked him out, haha. Who told others to get close to my little Linger? Looking at you, you seem to be very happy. Who's your family? Narcissist." Lin Ling's class did not have weekends, so she hurriedly chatted with Reynolds for a while before leaving. They agreed to meet next time and have a good talk. Oh no, I forgot to ask Lin Ling about her phone. Reynolds walked out of the training field in frustration. Seeing Aaron waiting there, his heart warmed. He walked over and hooked his arm around her shoulder. "Shijun, let's go. Let's go to Chong and City and have some fun." Haha. Shijun pushed Reynolds' arm away with a look of disgust. She sighed and asked, "Is it okay?" "Yes, it's okay." The two of them walked on the streets of Chong in emergency announcement. Emergency announcement. King's Realm Sanctuary Guild. The daughter of the guild leader, the genius magical girl, Miss Aaron, disappeared a week ago and has not been seen. Anyone who knows her whereabouts and provides useful information will receive a generous reward from the Sanctuary Guild. Sure enough, the magic mirror around them was still showing this message. The mirror showed the beautiful and unruly genius magical girl, Aaron. Aaron was instantly attracted by this message and stared at it without blinking. She could not help but feel a little proud. Her disguise technique was very powerful. No matter how many messages she sent, it would be useless. Reynolds smiled and asked, "Brother, you've seen this too? What do you think about this Aaron incident?" Aaron did not answer. She looked at Reynolds' burning gaze and asked, "What about you, Reynolds? What do you think of her?" In Aaron's imagination, Reynolds would definitely praise her beauty. After all, Reynolds gave her the impression that he was the kind of person who was cold on the outside but passionate on the inside. She could tell from Reynolds' daily life in the dormitory and school life that he was constantly looking at the female students. Reynolds laughed and said, I think this little girl called Erin is really an extraordinary idiot. She doesn't want to be the city lord's daughter, but insists on running around and suffering. She should be careful not to be eaten by magical beasts. Erin was about to faint when she heard this. She was so angry that she wanted to press Reynolds to the ground and beat him up to vent her anger. Reynolds was shocked to see her filled with righteous indignation. He asked, Brother, don't tell me you. Chapter 417. Erin also felt that she had lost her composure just now and immediately calmed down. Could it be that she had been exposed? Now that she was facing herself in the magic mirror, even if she had the disguise technique, she could still be exposed. Reynolds continued, Could it be that you have a crush on her? I say, brother, you can't have such a capricious woman. There are plenty of fish in the sea. Don't you think so? When Erin heard this, she was so angry that she fainted. What? She liked herself? No matter how narcissistic she was, she would not be like this, right? And most importantly, how could he say that about her? After returning to school on the weekend, Reynolds put away his relaxed heart and threw himself into a new round of training. The basic theory class would end in a week. In fact, this class was not very useful. It only briefly mentioned the basic contents of MMA-related courses and did not explain in depth. During the practical class, the instructor still had to repeatedly emphasize to deepen understanding, so the academy only used 2 weeks to study the theory. However, one of the courses was an exception, and that was the basic cultivation technique. The name of cultivation technique should be known by everyone in the king's world, and no one didn't know about it. Whoever mentioned these 3 words would basically have their eyes lit up like a hungry pervert who had seen a sexy beauty whose clothes were half undone, who knew how many people dreamed of being taught the most advanced method to increase their strength. But most of the time, if they did not grow up in a powerhouse's family or a famous family, they could only look at it and sigh. However, the emergence of the academy provided a chance for mid-level and lower-level combatants to realize their dreams. Instructors who knew cultivation techniques and had rich experience would personally guide and teach them. When they encounter problems, they could even reduce the time to fumble around. That was something that people yearned for. Therefore, no matter how expensive the academy's tuition was, no matter how far and dangerous the journey was, there were still many people who saved up enough money to study here, or sent their children here to get a shortcut on the road to becoming a powerhouse. As long as it was a cultivation technique class, no one would be absent. After meeting Lin Ling for a short while, Reynolds was incomparably satisfied and happy. The two of them agreed to meet again next time. There are countless tracks in a human body that spiritual power can pass through, called spiritual power channels, or spiritual path for short. They are like spider webs, huge and complex, wide and narrow. To put it simply, the cultivation method of the demon warriors was to absorb the spiritual power in the air through breathing. Then they would use their spiritual vision to guide the spiritual path in their body to absorb as much of it as possible before it was lost. Most of the spiritual paths were neutral, but there were also a few that had attributes, such as the fire spiritual path, the wood spiritual path, and so on. When the pure spiritual energy absorbed from the space flowed through the spiritual path of a certain attribute, its nature would change and be transformed into spiritual energy with that attribute. Of course, a spiritual path's effect on pure spiritual energy was minuscule. However, if the spiritual energy didn't pass through a spiritual path of the same attribute, but hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of spiritual paths, the situation would be different. Once a weak change in nature accumulates to a certain extent and becomes strong enough, it will undergo a qualitative leap and become a spiritual power that truly possesses the attribute. In other words, it will become a martial power. This was the brilliant explanation of Instructor Jack, who had a deep understanding of martial strength. When the students below heard the words martial strength, they all boiled over. Martial strength was the most important thing to the demon warriors. It was the ultimate goal that they would always pursue. Jack was also aware of the newbie student's thirst for martial prowess. Even though his lecture had been interrupted, he didn't show the slightest bit of displeasure. Instead, he waved his hand to calm everyone down. I know what you're all thinking, but you must be careful not to be impatient when it comes to cultivation. Just the self-exploration of the countless spiritual paths is already an extremely profound and complicated matter. Even the most basic release of martial prowess will require a large amount of time to succeed. You can't think of accomplishing it in one go, so students must have sufficient patience. All the rookie students roared yes. Jack nodded in satisfaction and continued, the most ideal way to cultivate martial strength is to have all the spiritual paths that spiritual energy flows through be of the same attribute. Of course, this is impossible, because there are too many spiritual paths in our bodies, from breathing to finally losing them. There are countless paths in between. We will always go astray. The crossroads below don't have spiritual paths of the same attribute. What we have to do is to avoid going astray as much as possible in the circulation of spiritual energy. At the very least, we have to ensure that the majority of the spiritual paths are of the same attribute. If too many spiritual paths of other attributes pass through in the process of circulation, it will cause the martial strength to become heterogeneous and impure. And the most important thing is that we can't go to spiritual paths of the opposite attribute. Otherwise, the spiritual energy will cancel out and cause the fighting aura to regress. This is more or less the same principle as a domain. As for which attribute martial strength you want to choose to cultivate, I suggest that you decide according to the elemental sensitivity data given to you by the tester. Generally speaking, the stronger the sensitivity of a certain element, the stronger the ability to transform it into that attribute in the body. Magi's cultivation method is a bit more complicated, so I won't say much. Reynolds was also deep in thought. Recently, he had followed his tutor's teaching method to cultivate his body strength. All the meridians and even blood vessels in his body would have a kind of unobstructed and smooth feeling, as natural as breathing in and out. Reynolds also knew that it was extremely difficult to cultivate martial strength. Grasping martial strength also required great perseverance and luck. All the other students listened as if they were intoxicated. Jack's lecture was very clear and concise, making them, who had never come into contact with the art of cultivation, feel as if they had entered a new world and were endlessly excited. And now, Reynolds had completely developed a dull interest in these basic theory classes. The only thing that could interest him was the students going to the training field every day for actual combat training. Of course, even if there weren't any actual combat training classes, Reynolds would still go to the training field from time to time to vent without restraint. This wasn't because Reynolds was passionate about martial arts, but because he felt inexplicably irritable. This irritation wasn't a physical irritation, but a psychological irritation, and a sense of loss towards the future. Reynolds had also inquired about Lin Ling's class, but he didn't have the time to see her. Even if he had the time, Lin Ling didn't have the time. This made Reynolds rather depressed, as if he had a feeling of power, but nowhere to use it. Because he was bored and couldn't see Lin Ling, Reynolds could only immerse himself in the training field every day. Every morning, Reynolds would be the second to arrive at the training field and the second to last student to leave at night. This was because he had discovered that there was another skinny warrior who was even more reckless than him. After another day of training, Reynolds felt that it was necessary to get to know this like-minded student who even a bored and perverted training maniac like himself admired. So he walked up to him and said, "Hey brother, can we have a chat?" Chapter 4:18. Hi. Contrary to Reynolds's expectations, he initially thought that this warrior, who was even more barbaric than his barbarian classmates, would be a ruthless character who was as straightforward and decisive as he was. However, he did not expect that this warrior was an introverted and honest person who was not good at socializing. He was surprised that Reynolds took the initiative to strike up a conversation with him. Reynolds even stuttered when he spoke. Reynolds reached out his hand and said, "My name is Reynolds. I'm from Year 1 Martial Arts Class 2. I admire your hard work. Can we be friends?" The warrior replied, "Sure, sure." He reached out his hand and shook Reynolds' hand. He smiled foolishly. His white teeth were set off by his dark skin, making him look very bright and sincere. After a few seconds, the warrior felt that he had been a little rude. Since the other party had already introduced himself, he had to return the favor. That was the only way to show respect to the other party. So he quickly apologized and added, I'm sorry. I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Linka. I'm from Year 1 Warrior Class 8. Reynolds was impressed by Linka's sincerity. Although Linka was a bit dull, he was not scheming at all. Reynolds said, "Brother, you've been training hard." Linka grinned and said, "I can't help it. My parents are herders. They don't make much money. They spent all their savings to send me to Randolph Academy. If I slack off, I'll be letting them down." "Oh, you're such a filial son," Reynolds praised. "By the way, are you done with today's training? Let's go for a meal together." Linka hesitated. Well, it was still early, and there was still a lot of time before the training ended. Reynolds didn't give him time to think. Don't hesitate. You have to strike a balance between work and rest. It's not good to work too hard. It's not worth it if you break your body. Let's go, it's my treat. Reynolds dragged Linka away. Reynolds' personality was like that. If he liked someone, he would immediately become a good brother. When they passed by the dormitory, Reynolds said, "Brother Linka, wait for me downstairs. I'll ask my other friend if he has eaten yet. If he hasn't, let's go together. It'll be more lively with more people." Reynolds felt that his roommate was a little strange these few days. He had been acting strangely and wanted to go to the toilet from time to time. His spirit and appetite were not good, and he wondered if he was sick. This was also the reason why Reynolds had returned early. He had always cared for his brothers like they were his own limbs. Irene was lying on the bed, listlessly. She had been very irritated these past few days because her period had come. This was perhaps the most troublesome physiological phenomenon for a woman. She would always feel depressed for no reason. This was also one of the reasons why the recovery pill did not work. Naturally lost blood could not be replenished with a recovery pill. That fellow had gone out to practice again. He probably wouldn't be back so soon. Aaron missed him a little now. Of course, it wasn't like a day apart between lovers that felt like 3 years. Instead, it was because she would feel much better if he could tell her a few jokes and make her laugh. Just as Aaron was thinking about how great it would be if she could teleport him back, the sound of a key turning came from outside the door. Aaron was shocked. No way. How strong was her telekinesis? He was actually able to summon him back immediately. Aaron got up and opened the door. She almost bumped into Reynolds, who was about to knock on the door. "Oops." Aaron patted her chest and said exaggeratedly, "Reynolds, what are you doing? You scared me to death." Reynolds laughed. "I see that you're not in good spirits these past few nights. You're also late for dinner. I don't think you've eaten yet, right? Why don't we go to the cafeteria together? Humans are made of iron, and rice is made of steel. It's impossible not to eat." Aaron was about to speak when Reynolds' nose twitched. "Why is there a fishy smell?" He caught a glimpse of a damp red cotton cloth in the trash bin in Aaron's room. "Aaron, what's wrong with you?" In fact, Aaron had just changed out of the cloth for her period. There were no feminine products in this world like Sophie or Bosom Bow. Women could only use cotton cloth with high absorbency. That was why Reynolds didn't think of anything else. Aaron's pale face flushed red. She didn't know how to explain herself. She was too careless just now. She should have put away better. "Did you accidentally hurt yourself? Let me take a look. I have a secret medicine here that can heal your wound quickly." Aaron's face was almost completely red. How could she let a man look at her most private place? She struggled to come up with a suitable excuse. "It's fine, Reynolds. I was careless these past few days when I was trying to figure out how to cultivate. I suffered some internal injuries and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. That's why I haven't been in good spirits these past few days. But I'm pretty much healed now." Cultivation had its own dangers. Just like Qigong, there was the risk of Qi deviation. And if one was injured by their own spiritual energy, they couldn't be healed with recovery pills. Reynolds didn't think much of it. He nodded to show his concern. Aaron, we've only taught you the basics of cultivation. Don't mess around. You might be in danger. Aaron breathed a sigh of relief. Reynolds put his hand on her shoulder and said, All right, let's go eat. It's my treat today. Let's go to the Academy's high-class restaurant to replenish your energy. Aaron had no choice but to be hooked by Reynolds. Even though she forbade him from touching her, he still liked to put his hand on her shoulder. He said it was more like a buddy. Aaron was helpless. She couldn't change him, so she could only change herself and slowly get used to it. She was still annoyed. She said as she walked, Hey, Reynolds, tell me a joke. This was the first time Aaron had taken the initiative to make such a request. Reynolds was startled. Then he smiled. All right, let me think. A few seconds later, he slapped his head and said, All right, I'll tell you something related to blood. Aaron thought, most things related to blood involve violence. What's so funny about that? In the past, during the war on the continent, women were always on the second line of battle. But there was a female warrior who didn't lose out to men. She wanted to rush to the front line, like the men, to participate in the defense, but she couldn't because of the country's restrictions. In the end, she came up with a good idea. She disguised herself as a man and sneaked into the men's camp. Finally, she got a chance to show off. Brave and good at fighting, she made a lot of contributions. In the end, she was even promoted to general. However, now you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.